Miguel Myers. Welcome to my horror confessional, where every week I will have a guest come on and talk about one classic horror movie that they haven't seen and why. We'll discuss the movie, the actors, and probably get off topic quite a bit. Once I believe that they have properly atoned, I will absolve them of their horror movie sin. Today we have Johnny Compton. He is a San Antonio based author whose short stories have appeared in several publications since 2006, including Pseudopod, Strange Horizons, and the No Sleep podcast. His fascination with frightening fiction started when his kindergarten teacher played a record of the classic ghost story, The Golden Arm, for her class. The Spite House is his debut novel through Tor Nightfire. His fiction has appeared in Strange Horizons, the No Sleep no, I said that already. Um, he is also the creator and host of the podcast Healthy Fears, which is available on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, and most other podcasting platforms. Johnny, welcome to the confessional.
Thank you, Miguel. I'm glad to be here. Try to absolve my horror movie sin here.
Yes, exactly. So first, I want to go back a little bit to your bio here. The Golden Arm. I'm not familiar with the story.
Oh, I'd love to to tell you about it. It's not very complicated. It's a very simplistic, direct kind of the way I loved them when I was a kid. Ghost story. Um, I guess ghost story, revenant story. I'm not sure exactly how you qualify it, but uh, a character, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes it's a husband or wife or a brother or all kind of variety of different people. But somebody, for some reason, has a golden arm, um, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's an arm. One of their appendages is literally made of gold.
Okay.
They get buried with it, and all they want to do is make sure they get buried with their golden arm. Somebody comes along, unearths their corpse, steals the arm from them, and then they in the various retellings, the one I originally heard, it was I think it was a husband and wife. The wife dies with the golden arm. The husband goes and gets it because I mean, you're not really supposed to be able to take it with you, and it's not doing any good in the ground. As opposed to I could sell this and probably fetch a fortune off of it. The wife comes back to life, stalks the husband through the night and in the house, and just the whole time is chanting, "Who's got my golden arm?" And she's calling through that, and like I'm hearing this. I can distinctly remember this, like 5 years old, and the teacher, Miss Nina, R.I.P. Mrs. Nina, she played it on a record, and so it's got the scratchy record vibe. That's the way I hear it in my head. It's got the scratchy vinyl quality to it,
Yes.
and somebody's calling out, "Who's got my?" And that's all they do. And then eventually they find the person, they corner the person, and then they scream, "You've got it!" And that's it's just leading up to just that. And it's very straightforward, very simplistic. I actually wrote um, on my blog, I guess not too long ago. I think a couple months ago, I wrote about kind of the history of that story, and it goes back to in Mark Twain used to tell it all the time. There was an episode of Andy Griffith where he tells the story and he has his own variation on it. Um, but you can kind of trace its roots back. The way it's treated in America, it's like it's an old Southern, um, you know, sometimes even specifically categorized as a story that basically black people originated in the South. And me being a black author, as much as I'd love to take credit for that completely, you can actually kind of trace it back to like Europe and pretty much anywhere you can find ghost stories. It's just kind of there's a universality of this idea of people wanting to be buried with something valuable, and there's all these varieties of stories where somebody wants to be buried with something valuable. A grave robber comes along, steals it. That person now reawakens and stalks the grave robber to reclaim what was stolen from them. Apparently, that was like a very big deal in somewhere in our ancient history as human beings. We were like, ooh, the worst thing you can do is steal from somebody's grave and take away this valuable item that otherwise is going to be completely useless in the ground.
Yeah, that sounded creepy. And how old were you?
I was about 5 years old. I grew up
Yeah.
in,
Okay.
yeah, I was real young, but I was in Mississippi, and like I think culturally, at least when I was a kid down there in the '80s, um, I think that the idea of just telling ghost stories and trading ghost stories was just kind of foundational. They just kind
Yeah.
of treated it like, oh, you're never too young to hear a ghost story.
So that reminds me, I grew up around the 80s as well. And I grew up in Chicago, and they had, I don't remember the radio station, but at night, they would play. They would have this old radio hour where they would play old radio broadcasts from the 40s and 50s, and a lot of the time they were horror ones. And so it was like then some of the names of the programs were like Escape or Lights Out or like Nightfall, Quiet Please. Boris Karloff had a show on there. I'm not remembering exactly what it was. And I would listen to these at night with the lights off and the radio. I was supposed to be asleep, but I was fascinated by this stuff. So I tucked the radio under my pillow and just pretend like I'm sleeping, but I was listening to those stories, and they
Yeah,
just like fascinated me. And fairly recently, within the last year or two, I found that all that stuff is online. You can listen to it now for free, and it's just so incredible.
I was gonna say that's amazing because I pretty routinely there's a podcast that just replays them. It's like I think it's just called Old Time Radio or something like that, and like
Mhm.
it's like the big podcasting network is Old Time Radio, and they have one that's just called The Horror. And you're naming off those titles. I was like, yep, uh, Lights Out and Escape and all those. Like they'll play those, and I love listening to those. It's some of it's pretty cheesy, but I still just like there's something about um, kind of the simplified horror and kind of the more direct, just straightforward idea of, hey, something weird and creepy happens, and it's just some person stalking these people, or something fairly direct in a lot of those stories. I'm envious of the fact that you were able to like listen to them as a kid, because I can only imagine how much more impactful they would be, because I didn't get around to listening to those until I was an adult. So being able to hear them as a kid on the radio late night, that sounds incredible.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, but I went through a lot of batteries. So my mom was like, "Why do you need more batteries?" I was like, "I don't know,"
Oh yeah, this thing
because
was.
I would fall asleep with the radio to my ear. But it's funny because I'm very just recently I just listened for the first time to the War of the Worlds broadcast by Orson Welles. Have you heard that one?
I've never actually listened to it. I'm very familiar with like the impact it had, but for whatever reason, I never got around to actually listening to the original broadcast.
Same, same. I'm working on a potential project with a friend about the War of the Worlds, and so I was like, I should probably listen to it. And it was interesting. It was kind of fascinating, and I could completely understand why somebody in 1938 would believe that this was actually happening. You know?
Yeah, totally. It's kind of like the original. I mean, it's before found footage or what have you, but it kind of is the precursor to that. Like we're going to treat this completely like it's a real thing, and kind of freak people out that way. And it for some people it obviously it went farther than they they anticipated.
Yeah, it reminds me of. I keep going back and back and back. It reminds me of the reports of the first movie ever, or the first one of the first movies ever, where it's just the train coming straight at you, and people in the theater when they saw that thought that there was actually a train coming at them, and they like ran out and stuff like that. So it's like it kind of reminds me of that. Every time there's new technology shown to humanity, we're like terrified of it. Which, truthfully, I mean, we should probably be terrified. I've talked in the past about. I talked with R.J. Joseph just a couple weeks ago about like being scared of technology and how it's being used. But yeah, I just thought I was really connecting when you said when you were talking about the old radio broadcasts and stuff like that. I that really has helped to. It was probably like the seeds, that started my love for horror. And along with that, it was like my older brother was 10 years older than me in like mid 80s. So he was way into like, he was watching movies that I definitely shouldn't be watching, but I was watching over his shoulder. And so I was just wondering, I know you said that this teacher kind of engendered your love for horror, but was it in all aspects? Like where did it branch off from there? Did it go to reading, or was it movies, or what was the journey?
A lot more reading,
Mhm.
um, movies eventually. I mean, and by when I say eventually, like I don't know, 2 or 3 years later. Um, but yeah, the reading really took off. We had a library that had some pretty good, allegedly true ghost story kind of books and stuff like that. And you're an '80s kid too. You said we're in similar age brackets. So do you remember the Troll Book Fair and stuff like that?
We had the Scholastic Book Fair.
Okay, okay, yeah. You never know. Like I think it's like regional, and
Yes,
ours
yeah.
was called like it was Mississippi. If or I might just be misremembering, but I think ours was called the Troll Book Fair, which is like weird to think of it being called that now. That I keep saying that, but
Well, the
like
thing was,
they,
like, I was in a Catholic school, so maybe there were troll book fairs, but my Catholic school wouldn't, maybe because of the name, wouldn't allow that.
but I was
Um,
in a Catholic school too. But
oh, okay, okay.
I'm telling you, like
Are we
at
the
least in
same
the
person
'80s,
here?
I know, right? For real.
This is
And
awesome.
80s Mississippi was like such a weird. I mean, I don't want to get too far off track. Stop me if I'm like just too far afield.
Oh,
But it was
please.
just
This is the
so
podcast. We get off track.
beautiful because it was just so. I always think back because I know when I got older, and I know it's more of a evangelical thing, and you don't want to conflate the two. But I remember getting older, and people would be like, "Oh, people with the church, they're very down on Halloween," and I was like, "Really?" Because the Catholic school where I grew up, they were like all in on Halloween. Like they had the full Halloween costume contests. Kids would show up dressed as like every horror villain imaginable. I'm presuming that maybe dressing up as the devil was off limits, but I don't think anybody like they never told us that, and I just think nobody wanted to dress up as that because it's kind of, I mean, you could do that, or you could dress up as like Freddy Krueger or Jason or Michael Myers or anybody else. Like we picked the cooler stuff,
Yeah.
Wolfman,
Yes.
anything. Like so, like I tried to dress up as like the god of Halloween at at one point, and it was like they were
That
just
sounds
all on
dope as
board.
fuck.
Yeah, it was not a
The
good
God of
costume, but it
Halloween.
was
Well, just the concept though sounds great. Maybe the
yeah,
follow through didn't
yeah.
didn't happen.
Yeah, when you're a kid, it's like, you got this visual up for it, and then it's like, no, that didn't materialize quite the way I thought it would. But it was, it started there with like what they had in the book fair when they would every time the book fair came along, I would want to get the book that's like the short scary stories, and if they had one about true alleged hauntings, I was really into that. We had, like I said, at the library, there's a prolific children's author who is now deceased, but his name was Daniel Cohen, and he wrote two books that were really formative for me. That are like two of the earliest books about that aren't horror, genre, but basically are as far as I'm concerned. And they were about allegedly true ghost stories and allegedly true, like kind of bizarre, creepy occurrences. One is called Monsters You've Never Heard of, and that's where I found out about the Jersey Devil and just various other like strange monsters, beyond Bigfoot and Loch Ness, stuff that you never, as a kid, I hadn't heard about, especially in the '80s. You didn't really know about. And the other one was called Ghostly Terrors, and it was just all about all these supposedly true hauntings. I learned about from there, like the most haunted castle in Scotland is allegedly Glom's Castle, and the Earl at one point there was an addicted to gambling basically, and he
Hmm.
couldn't find anybody to play cards with him, and angrily shouted, "I'll play cards with the devil himself if I have to." And then immediately somebody showed up at the castle, like a tall man dressed in all black, and just this mysterious figure, and saying allegedly, "Oh, I overheard that you need a second player for cards to do some gambling." They go into a secret room, um, apparently play the cards, and then the man disappears, and it's the presumption that he was the devil himself, as the Earl basically conjured him, and the Earl gambled away his soul, and the devil absconded with his soul. And that's like stuff I read when I was like 6 and 7 years old.
That's a great story.
That's a fantastic story.
I wanna find that book. Yeah, that's a great story.
It's and it's written for kids, so it's like it's very plain language, etc. But I have Ghostly Terrors. I haven't been able to track down a copy of Monsters You've Never Heard of since then, but I've read it like online a couple of times on like some online libraries since
Yeah.
then, just to kind of refresh my memory of it. But yeah, that's the stuff that got me into it, and then from there it started branching into more fiction reading. And there's an anthology that made a big impact on me when I think I was 7 years old when I read it's called Shutters by I think the name is Ross R. Olney is the editor that put together the anthology. But it had like, I didn't even realize this when I was a kid. I didn't realize this until much, much later in my life. It was like, oh, I was reading Robert Bloch when I was like 7 years old, apparently. And Robert Bloch is the author of Psycho.
Yeah, Psycho. Yeah. Okay.
And
And
he
he
has a
was in
short
that
story in there
anthology.
called, yeah, he has a short story in there called Sweets to the Sweets, which is really one of my favorite short stories of all time. Stephen King has talked about it. It has this awesome, gruesome ending. Um, and it's just this. I can't. I don't even want to say anything else about it because people should really just go try to find it and read it, because I can't recommend that one enough. But it
Isn't that
had that.
quoted in the original Candyman? Is it Sweets to the Sweet or
Yeah,
Sweets for the Sweet?
I think it's Sweets to the Sweet. Yeah, in
Yeah.
the original Candyman. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like a great, great little quote there, like you mentioned. And yeah, like that anthology had that. It had the original story of the monkey's paw, which is really kind of not kind of it's pretty imaginatively gruesome. Like it doesn't explicitly show anything graphic, but it really kind of lays out the idea that like you don't want to see what the resurrected son looks like after the mother wishes for him to be back alive after his industrial accident. And it
Yeah.
really captures that in a way that I feel like I had heard the story of the monkey's paw even as a kid, like somebody like kind of vaguely. I probably ran into it on TV or something.
Or Simpsons. The Simpsons did it in
Yeah,
Treehouse of Horrors.
yeah, exactly. So like probably somewhere there, but like reading the actual story was like, oh shit, like this is actually like really like so much darker and kind of more the paw itself is more evil. There's an implication in the story that the paw like is kind of consciously and deliberately making sure that your wishes are going to come out in the most fucked up fashion imaginable. So it like all those kind of things that I was reading in there. There's a bunch of great stories in that anthology. That's another one that I years later I picked up, and then it's when it really hit me. I was like, man, like, I guess I was reading some of these pretty impressive authors as a kid, not really realizing that this is who it is that I'm reading. You know?
Yeah. And how was your did your was your family supportive? Like did they care that you were reading horror at that age or anything like that?
Uh, yeah, they were not. I don't want to say they were unsupportive. Um, they were reasonably, what's the word? I don't want to say concerned. I think more annoyed than anything, almost anything else, because they knew like I would have crazy nightmares and not get to sleep, and then like,
Okay.
be like, you know,
Stop reading
kind
that
of
junk.
yeah, exactly. And it's like but I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop. I wanted to know more. I wanted to read more stories. I wanted to hear about local stories. Kids at school would tell me stuff. Um, I had friends, I knew a kid who told me that Bloody Mary was supposed to live in this haunted house down the street from my house. And like, that was like supposed to be like the legend. It was this old decrepit house. And they were like, that's where Bloody Mary lives. When she's not coming out of mirrors, that's where she goes to. And I used to have these recurring nightmares about being trapped in Bloody Mary's house. And every once in a while, I'll still have it, even now as an adult, but not nearly as much as when I was a kid. I would just be like wandering in this old dark house and knowing it's Bloody Mary's house, and I couldn't find a way out. And I'd find a window, and I could see all my friends outside, like they would be having some school function, and the nuns and priests would be there. And for whatever reason, one priest was flying. It's your dreams. It's fucking weird.
Well,
And like,
speaking of weird dreams, we'll be talking about that later on with this
oh
movie.
yeah, no kidding, no kidding. But yeah, like just that all that stuff was in implanted in my brain, and so my folks they kind of understood like, hey, this is his interest, so like they never really shot it down per se, but they were frustrated a lot of the time, I think, because when I was a kid, it was like, oh, I'm gonna watch this or I'm gonna read this, and they're like, God, we're gonna have to deal with this though, like we're gonna have to be the one trying to drag you out of bed in the morning because you didn't actually get to sleep until 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Because you were staring at the damn door to your bedroom the whole time, hoping that somebody evil isn't on the other side.
That sounds amazing. So, along with your reading, did the writing go along the same time, or did that come later?
Yeah, the writing came along a little later. I can remember specifically in fifth grade, I think, is when I started trying to write something horror related. It was all just the worst shit ever. Um, and then, but I do remember like, and in my novel, that's one of the people I dedicate the novel to is my fifth grade teacher, Sister Gail, because she was like, you can actually write, but what you're writing is like you need to get better. Like she basically pointed that out. And I remember, and I was trying to write horror stuff, but I wasn't even really writing stories. It was just like it's hard to even describe. It was almost just like I was writing a Wikipedia article trying to describe the idea that I had in my head instead
Well,
of
you
actually
were in
trying to put
fifth
it in a
grade.
story.
Let's give fifth grade Johnny Compton some slack.
Well, I mean, I would, but the thing I remember is there was some kind of writing, like a story writing contest, and I had
Mm.
submitted something to it, and just it was completely, it was trash. And then somebody else won, and they read their story, and it was like, oh, that's what I'm doing wrong. And I remember Sister Gail looking at me when the other person was going up to read their story, and the little victory they had, and she was looking at me. She was like, that should have been you. And I can see her still to this day, like her looking at me and being like, you fucked up, basically. She couldn't say that, she's a nun, but basically being like, this should have been you. Like you have the ability to do this. You're not really locked in. You're not being patient with what you want to write and actually coming up with a story. You're just throwing junk on the page and hoping that everybody's just going to go along with it.
Yeah.
And I remember that, and so that's why like you said, it's fifth grade. I should probably cut myself more slack, but I remember I could still see her, um, like looking at me, and I mean, having to say it surreptitiously because you can't just literally say that in front of everybody. Stop the
Yeah.
action. Hey, this other kid here that I was really rooting for. I wish he would have done better.
She
Um,
almost Kanye'd you at the Oscar or
yeah,
at the
yeah,
Grammys. It's like Britney, oh, not Britney Spears, Beyonce, whatever.
yeah, yeah. It's like Beyonce should have had the trophy instead of Taylor Swift or what have you. Yeah,
Yeah,
she
yeah.
didn't quite do that to the other person, but it was. I'll never forget that, and that's what kind of drove me to think like, okay, maybe I've got something here. It took me a long time to to get to the point I needed to, and I had a couple of other teachers along the way tell me something similar because I lacking of a discipline and some focus there when I was younger, and kind of trying to take shortcuts with some of the stories. But I did always have it in me, or at least since fifth grade, to think I do want to try to write some stuff.
Nice. And it sounds like you always knew that it was going to be horror, like you were going to be writing horror.
Yeah, definitely. That was
Yeah.
that was always like it was. Yeah, I mean, I had some other stuff that I liked. Some fantasy. I was a big into like Final Fantasy, the video game, actually. So like the actual first thing I ever wrote that I was actually really concentrating on and thinking I really want to do this, and like on a larger scale, I tried to write a movie script in college, and it was um, basically a clone story of Final Fantasy VII. Like not quite fan fiction, but Final Fantasy VII had just come out, and I was obsessed with the game,
Okay.
and I stole a lot of story beats from the overall Final Fantasy series, but Final Fantasy VII in particular. Um, and then, so I had some of that as well, but I mean, horror was like the first love, and I always came back to that.
Nice. So, do you have some inspirations or some people that you reference in like in your writing? Like a lot of people say like a Stephen King type or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Stephen King, obviously, like you said, that's, I mean, it's kind of a default template for a lot of horror inspiration.
He looms large over the horror literature.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, he was. It's hard to for people who weren't there at the time. It's hard to kind of maybe get people to understand what a significant pop cultural phenomenon Stephen King was in terms of being an author. I remember when, and this is like I don't know, like 15 years ago or so. I was at a family reunion, and this was when I was like still just trying to write anything, and I like sold I think my first short story, and I talked to like a cousin who I'd never really met before, but we're finding stuff out about each other, and I told them, oh, I try to write stuff, and I'm working on a book one of these days, and she was like, I didn't tell her what genre at all what I was writing. She was like, oh, maybe you'll be like the next Stephen King. Like that's the level of popularity, and not like he was the guy who like was kind of a when people thought author, a lot of people just thought, oh, if you want to be like the biggest author of all time, be Stephen King. And
Right.
like so it went beyond even horror. So if he can do it beyond horror, imagine his impact on horror. So definitely that, and I've got a ton of Stephen King novels, but also just like I said, Robert Bloch. I kept going back to that, just kind of once I realized, oh, this is who I've read when I was a kid, and this is like one of my favorite short stories of all time. So there was some of that I have in there, and then as I got older, there was a Southern author who is passed, but named Michael McDowell, and he has some really cool, interesting Southern Gothic novels. One of my favorites, there's one called The Elementals, and I actually have a direct reference to that in my book at one point, just
Okay.
as a kind of a shout out, and just some of those things along the way to just kind of carry over as influences amongst I don't know, just too many other authors to even really name. It's so many of them that once Stephen King is an awesome influence, but once you get to a certain point as I think a horror fan and author, maybe where you're like, I want to see what else is out there and what's beyond
Yeah,
even that.
exactly. It's like you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. Stephen King, he's awesome, but let's try some other things.
Yeah, it's like if you were like, like basketball player, who's your favorite? If you're like, okay, I want to say Michael Jordan, but like there's got to be somebody else too, right? Like not every
Right.
kid can, say like literally, I just want to be Michael Jordan. Like, okay, what if you don't have the hang time? Like you might need to look at, what if maybe you need to be more Larry Bird if you just get a good shot
Yeah,
up.
I was a Sean Kemp dude.
Awesome.
Rain
Oh, the
Man. He
Rain
was my
Man. Yeah,
dude. Yeah, he was my
yeah.
guy. The Seattle Supersonics. I was born in Chicago, born and raised in Chicago, and the Bulls were my number one. But right there, number two was Sean Kemp and Gary Payton and
I was
Detlef
gonna
Schrempf.
say
Yeah,
the Sonics were a fun team to watch. That was the thing. They were like youthful. They had a lot of good energy. Kemp is throwing like off the backboard alley oops to, or Peyton's throwing like off the backboard alley oops to Kemp. It was, yeah, that's awesome, man.
yeah. And then it was in '95 or '96 finals.
Head to head.
Head to head Bulls Sonics. Yeah, I didn't know who to root for. I mean, I ended up rooting for the Bulls, but it was a hell of a match. I love that. This is the first time I think we've talked about sports on this podcast, and it will be the last. But I couldn't let that pass without talking about Sean Kemp and the
Yeah, shout
Seattle
out to Sean
SuperSonics
Kemp.
in the '90s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about your growing up, like your literature influence, stuff like that. How about movies? You said it came along a couple years later. So what were you watching as a kid?
Um, it's funny because I just listened to the episode you guys you did with Celso. Love that episode.
Oh,
Um,
thank you. Appreciate that.
and
He's a
he
great guest.
mentioned, yeah, that was so good. And he mentioned Aliens, and I thought, oh man, like, yeah, I watched the hell out of Aliens a lot when I was a kid too. It was on, like, I feel like it was on cable all the time. Scared the hell out of me. I've had more nightmares about the alien from Aliens, which is, I know, technically called a xenomorph. I never call it. It's just, to me, in my brain, it's always just the alien,
Yeah.
like it's the only one that ever existed. And I've had more nightmares about that. And so I watched Aliens a hell of a lot, and I was like obsessed with it. And then I eventually got around to watching Alien, the
First, yes.
predecessor, and that's my favorite. Alien is my favorite horror movie.
I read your blog post on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I could talk about that all day, man. I love that movie so much. And so yeah, like around that time is when I was like, that age, and I've got some older brothers too that would let me watch some stuff, or I'd end up watching certain stuff with them when I was on like HBO or something, and it was like,
Yes.
yeah, like I remember watching Sleepaway Camp kind of by accident. I had this crazy experience with Sleepaway Camp where I, it was like earlier in the evening. I guess I was pretty tired. We were watching some kind of comedy set at a camp. Um, like it was like, I don't know, around 7 or 8 at night it had to be or something. But I was in the living room with my brothers. I fall asleep, and I wake up, and I don't realize like how long I've been asleep, I guess, and
Mm.
I don't realize that now it's gone from a comedy set at a campground to like sleepaway camp. So I'm watching it like, and it's the scene in Sleepaway Camp where, and God, I got to be like 8 or 9 years old or something when this is happening. It's the scene in Sleepaway Camp where one of the kids gets killed by, they trap the kid in the kid in a bathroom stall, and then stick the hornet's nest or the bee's nest through the window. Mind you, I'm like super allergic to bees too, so this was already
Oh.
freaking me out. And then they stick in, but like
Yeah.
in my head, I'm still thinking like, oh well, this is like a comedy. So he's gonna like bust out of the bathroom stall, pants around his ankles, getting stung by bees, and 80s joke shit. Like that's what you're
Yeah.
expecting. Then the kid gets stung to death. Like has a face, and I'm just like, what the hell happened with this movie? This isn't funny at all.
This made a quick turn.
Yeah, I was like, what? And that's when it like clicked for me, like started to click. I was like, I think this is a different movie from the. I don't think I remember any of these characters. This is something else. And so then I ended up watching Sleepaway Camp, which I'm sure my like if my brothers ever hear this, they'd be like probably like vaguely in denial, like no, like still denying it to our parents to this day. Like no, we
Yeah.
never let them watch stuff like that. And it's like you didn't like encourage me to, but you didn't kick me out the room either.
Right.
But like, yeah, I'd watch that, and like, I mean, when I was a kid, like, everybody kind of had to pick a side. It's like Freddy or Jason or Michael Myers, or what team are you on? Who's your guy? And I was Team Krueger all the way.
Okay.
And
All
so the
right.
original Nightmare on Elm Street and then Nightmare on Elm Street Part Three were like
Dream
huge
Warriors. Yeah.
influences. The Dream Warriors was like a big deal. I remember as a kid because it was like this idea of like trying to fight back, and it's still horror, but the characters get to be a little more heroic than in the average slasher movie. That was like a huge deal for me as a kid.
Yeah, that's my nephew was here. He's 25. He was here with his girlfriend a couple months ago over the summer, and they hadn't seen that series. And every time they come, they visit. We see one series. Like last year, we did the Rex series.
Hmm.
This year, we did. They were here for a while, so we did the all Nightmare on Elm Street and also all Friday the 13th, like
Oh
all those.
wow.
and then at the end we got to see Jason versus Freddy. So he really, really enjoyed Freddy, the whole series, and it was really cool because to see this, younger kid, younger generation, like still enjoying. I mean, not all the movies because some of the movies were clunkers, but but I mean, same thing with the Halloween franchise. Like I'm a huge Halloween franchise guy. I'm a huge Michael Myers fan, but I know not all the movies are the greatest. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's interesting to hear that you were a Freddy guy. See, I hadn't seen the original until I was in my 20s, but I saw a lot of the sequels. And the sequels is where Freddy became Freddy, where he's cracking jokes and making fun of people and like playing Nintendo and he had the power glove, all that sort of stuff. That was like in the sequels, but in the first one is actually a really terrifying horror movie.
Yeah, he's completely horrifying in the first one, and he's still doing like taunting stuff, but it's way more sinister. And like you said, it's not nearly as goofy and one-linery.
Yeah,
And
he's
that's
not
even
riding a broom in a tornado.
yeah, exactly. And like even like up like I said, to me up to like part three, especially part two is like kind of weird and it has its own weird, crazy backstory. There's a great documentary on that on Shutter.
Scream
Um,
Queen,
Yes,
great
yes. So
documentary.
like there's like a lot to unpack with that. Um and even like at the time, even like without knowing a lot of that stuff, like I remember just feeling like part two was kind of a weird little it wasn't like a bad movie at the time, but the way we perceived it. But I remember like all my friends being like, "Yeah, it was okay." We thought Freddy was gonna like really knock it out the park his second appearance, and then Dream Warriors came out, and it was like it's like the last movie that was like to me the perfect blend of like early menacing Freddy, but now he's starting to get a little bit more jokey.
Yeah,
And the one liners are coming in, but they haven't overtaken his whole personality yet. And he still just feels like this is a scary dude, and I would not, want to have to deal with this. And like you said, then later on it became, for the last, three movies in that original series, 4, 5, and 6, it just gets increasingly sillier with, you're just showing up for Freddy, and so he becomes kind of the a clown a little bit, um, entertaining people before killing. It was, I thought that was like a, those kind of things happen. It
yeah. Although New Nightmare is meta as fuck
exactly,
and actually real good.
yeah. That's where they reclaimed it, right? That's where Wes Craven comes back in and is like, okay, we're gonna switch Freddy back to where he originated, the really terrifying figure that he started off as, which totally makes more sense when you look at all his backstory and just everything about him. The idea of him being kind of this more goofy, uh, less frightening um, horror villain. I don't know, that was a big misfire from the folks that were making some of those intervening films.
Yeah, and you can see a through line between New Nightmare and Scream just a couple years later. It's like it's so meta, and
Yeah,
Craven was like in his wheelhouse right there. So, yeah. So, what would you say your genre is? Is it slashers or because this movie that we're here to watch to talk about today, Hour of the Wolf, is not a slasher, and so I was just wondering, what do you find your genre being?
my genre these days, I think I'm a big kind of going back to my earlier roots. I'm a big like haunted house, anything to do with a ghost. I'm a sucker for it. Like if you throw a ghost in the mix, and as long you're working with an advantage on me if you have a ghost in the mix and you'd like make it creepy and mysterious. And that's always kind of been more effective on me. Like slashers, I was really really super into Scream, and like there was like a 2 or 3 year period like after Scream came out that I was me and my best friend were like, he bought the freaking Scream mask, he bought the Michael Myers mask. We were like just digging through every slasher we could find, old school. We were just obsessed with it. And then that like phase kind of, just passed, and I went back to like really loving ghost stories more so again. And then when the American remake of The Ring came out, I'd actually already seen Ringu originally.
Mhm.
Um, I got it off eBay in a cassette, in a video cassette that was like unlabeled because we
Oh
couldn't
shit!
find it in America. And so
Yeah,
I'd heard about this awesome movie about this ghostly Japanese girl and didn't know anything really about the plot though. That was like early days of internet, like finding out about movie stuff. Ordered it off early eBay. I get this video, blank video cassette, watch this movie, and it's about a cursed blank video cassette. And I'm like, maybe I'm but immediately call my buddy after, like, hey, you gotta watch this movie. I'm gonna give you the cassette. Make sure you watch it,
And you
just in
never
case.
heard from him again.
Yeah, exactly. But like all the ghost story movies always had an impact on me. So I remember the American remake of The Ring coming out. I think that came out like around 2002 or so.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember that kind of really being like my cutoff point again from slashers, to the extent of how much I was obsessed with them. I still love a good slasher um, movie, and actually trying to rewrite scripts, or go back to writing scripts, I should say again. Like the first one I've written in years since I was in college, basically, is a slasher slasher
Okay.
script idea I had. But so I've got that part in me too. But like the ghost story thing, if you give me a good ghost story, that's like crack for me. I'm hooked.
Nice. Well, then that kind of leads us into this movie, Hour of the Wolf. So when we first met, I met you at. I swear, the majority of my guests for this past season on My Horror Confessional, I've met at Ghoulish Book Festival, put on by Max and Lori. And it just goes to show how awesome everybody was that I met there, because you were another one of the people that I met there. And you actually had a reading there. Was that correct?
Yeah. I had that was my first ever reading. So Max
Nice.
worked me in. Max is the best. Lori's the best as well. Yeah, shout out to them. That was an awesome. Like, that set the bar high. That was like my first book festival like that too. So that set the bar really high for future ones that I've been to since then.
Yeah. And so I approached you and asked if you'd be interested in coming on, and you said you said you would be able to. So that was great. And then when I sent you the list, you chose a couple. I don't remember off top, but the one of the ones that you chose was Hour of the Wolf. And I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, somebody finally chose an Ingmar Bergman movie. Like, you classed this joint up. Like, I put it on there never thinking anybody would choose it, and you chose it. And I'm so happy you did, because this was one hell of a movie. But I did want to ask you, as I ask everybody, why do you think this particular movie passed you by? I know, like, it's not like on everybody's radar. Not a lot of people know about it. So, do you think that's what it was, or did you have another reason for it?
Yeah, for me, I mean, for me, it was I never really, I guess, knew that it was a horror movie. And like, I try to be well versed in, like you said, I'm classing up the joint. It was entirely accidental. But like, you try to, oh, I got to watch Bergman. I got to watch like The Seventh Seal and Scenes from a Marriage. The stuff that you're supposed to watch. But like, he's very prolific as a director, and
Yeah,
he made a ton of stuff. And it's like, you feel like you got to hit the is okay, as long as I've seen like the ones that are like the cemented, certified, everybody knows about them classics. I kind of don't, I feel like I got the Bergman experience. I dig it. I like Seven Seal. I could talk with somebody about that at like a fancy dinner party or something. But like, that's, the Hour of the Wolf. I mean,
his
I'd seen the
only horror
title.
movie.
Yeah, like I didn't even realize this is a horror movie. You kind of, you don't really think of Bergman having done that. So then I saw it on there, and then I went and I was like, man, like I've probably got to rectify this. Would be cool. Like, and they said, this is Bergman's only horror movie. And I was like, well, that's something that I owe it to myself to see, and I've just, just never occurred to me to even like consider the possibility that he'd even made a horror movie. So that's how it completely slipped my mind. Just kind of doing the more roundabout way of familiarizing yourself with staying at the periphery, the edges of Bergman, and not doing a deep dive or anything like that. It's like, I've seen the big one. I know. I got it. I got the idea of it. I think I
So
understand it.
you're a lot better than me, because I now have to confess to this being my first Bergman ever. I haven't even seen The Seventh Seal.
Oh
And
wow.
so, yeah, at the end of this podcast, I will be asking for absolution as well. So, seeing as how you went to Catholic school as well, we're
I was
we're
gonna say
good.
I'm very familiar with the idea of you got to seek your absolution. You got to confess to your sins. I'm very familiar with this.
Yeah, I am a Reformed Catholic, current atheist, and so it's just a format. I just enjoy it.
No, yeah, I totally get it. I was never even Catholic. My mom sent me to Catholic school because um because we that was like the only way to get to private school in Mississippi at the time, and I had three older brothers who basically ruined the idea of going to public school for me, because
I
they got into
gotcha.
enough trouble at public school that my mom was like, we got to figure out a private school solution. if that means send you to a Catholic school, even if you're not Catholic, so be it.
I understand. We had a couple people in our class who weren't Catholic as well, and it's like it's just the best. Well, not the best school, but
Yeah,
well, I get the best school in the area,
yeah,
which isn't too much.
everything's
So
relative, right?
yeah, exactly. Okay, so then I did want to talk a little bit about your podcast. So you do have a podcast as well called Healthy Fears, right? And I've listened to a couple episodes. I listened to your hospital horrors and your People Scream at Carnivals episodes,
Mhm.
and I really enjoyed them. I think you do a real good job of like deep diving and just like I don't know how you do it. I can't talk by myself. This is why I have guests on because I'm not able to form. I barely form see right now. I barely form sentences as it is. I can't do it by myself. And you do it by yourself. And I just think that that's an incredible trait and one that I really admire. So can you talk a little bit about your podcast and why you started it and stuff like that?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thanks for saying that. But I can assure you, I'm not very good at the talking to myself and talking by myself part either, and that's why the episodes are all scripted.
Mm.
Um, and my earliest episodes are not scripted and just super duper heavily edited. I used to not have a script. I just have kind of bullet points of ideas that I knew I wanted to talk about, and I was like, I'll just talk and wing it. And yeah, then I was spending so much time having to edit them because it's like, well, I can't use like 90% of this because I'm rambling.
Yeah.
If you're talking to yourself, you're trying to fill space, and like I'm stuttering over sentences, and like even now as it is with the scripting, it's like I still have a lot of editing to do, which is part of why the podcast has been on such a hiatus. I've been so focused on the writing, and there's a lot of work that goes into the podcast editing
So much
process. Is
work.
like the
So much
yeah,
work.
it trying to do that, and I care about like the atmosphere of it. I try to find good music and stuff like that, and it's time consuming. And meanwhile, I've got like a flood of ideas in my head, and I'm trying to put those on paper. But I do want people to listen to the podcast. It's actually nominated for a paranormality magazine award for podcasts for I think it's paranormality is the name of that. I hope I didn't get that wrong. It's gonna sound rude of me if I got that wrong, but I'm almost positive that's the case. And they give like a podcast awards, and one of them is for like film and TV kind of review or discussion.
Very
And I
cool,
got
man.
nominated for that,
Congratulations.
which yeah, thanks. I still am kind of in disbelief because I've done 15 episodes this season. I was supposed to do 20, and hopefully I'll get around to those 20. I like fulfilling my promise there because I was like real gung ho about yeah, I'm going to do that this season, and then it fell to the wayside. But for what's there, I'm real proud of it. I'm real happy with it, and like the idea of it, the concept of it. Um, you mentioned just what kind of motivated me to do that is just kind of my love of the horror genre in general, and my kind of just general perspective on fear is not necessarily always being the worst thing. People think of fear. There, you remember, like I think in the '90s they used to have those car stickers that said like "No Fear" or something like that. It was like when the you remember like that was like
Yeah,
the
the kids pissing on logos or something like that.
yeah like
Yeah.
and they'd be like "No Fear" and everybody's like conquer your fears and all this other stuff. And it's like fears. I get it. Some of your fears are bad, but that's why it's called healthy fears. Because like sometimes fear is going to be what saves your life, right? Like if you're like I shouldn't go here or do that because I'm afraid of what might happen. A lot of people have survived that way, and it's built with us intrinsically. It's a primal emotion for a reason. I like to say like basically we're all here because somewhere in our deep ancestry pool, somebody was afraid of something and it saved their life. Some caveman was like that's your farthest back ancestor was like I'm not going to walk by that snake. That snake's going to bite me and kill me, and that's
One
why
of
you're
our
here.
ancestors was like, "Nope," and just
Yeah,
walked away.
and just walked away, right? Like so. Yeah, I wanted to kind of approach it from this perspective of sometimes obviously your fears can be overwhelming and it can drive you to not make the best decision. Fear can be a detriment, but sometimes it can be a positive as well, and just trying to balance those out. um and look at how fear impacts us in fiction, in storytelling, why we're so obsessed with it, why we go back to these stories so often, which I think the reason why is essentially that it's inescapable, it's important to us, right? I think horror exists in basically every story that we tell that has life or death stakes, even if it's not a horror movie. You could watch, people make compilations out of Disney movies that have horror scenes in them, basically.
Right.
because even if you're not watching a literal horror movie, there's a part of it that's like a small horror movie in there. Virtually any movie that you've ever seen, like I said, that has life or death stakes. Like my first episode of this latest season, I talked about Die Hard, action movie classic, but it's also like there's scenarios in there that are genuinely scary. And if you were like in that scenario in real life and trying to put yourself in the character's shoes, this is frightening. This is terrifying to actually deal with some of the shit that's going on here. So just trying to take that perspective and really examine that and explore it. And I just thought it would be interesting and cool to talk about all these different little things that frighten us. That was my motivation basically to dive into that on the podcast. And I hadn't heard anybody else's podcast have something like that. So I figured it's an angle that's different in the enormous sea of podcasts that are out there. It's very similar to what yours is, right? Like you have a niche here. You know, this is not any nobody else is out here doing the horror confessional about, hey, what horror movie have you not seen that you probably should have seen already, and let's talk about it. Let's watch it and then let's talk about it. That's an awesome idea. So you're, in the vast array of podcasts out there, instead of just trying to talk about the stuff that everybody's talking about already, you want to find something in there that's pretty unique. And that was my motivation on that.
Nice. Well, thank you very much for the compliment. I appreciate that. And yeah, your podcast is really interesting, and I really dig it. So, for anybody listening, I would definitely recommend Healthy Fears podcast. Johnny's a great host, and he has really interesting topics on it. So, I also wanted to give you a chance to plug anything you want. I know you got your new book coming out, as well as where people can pre-order it. I know you have the pre-orders are up, where they can follow you on Twitter, all the ways that they can support you. If you could please let them know.
Sure, absolutely. Twitter, Instagram, even TikTok, it's all at Compton Writes. So Compton, my last name, and then Writes, Writes. And you can follow me on any of those. And The Spite House, my debut novel, long time coming, very excited about, will be coming out in February. So you got plenty of time to, if you don't have the money immediately right now, to pre-order. By all means, scrounge some up. It's a haunted house story. If you're unfamiliar with what a spite house is, you can figure it out probably just from the name, but it's a house literally built to spite someone or something. And that's a real world phenomenon. You can look that up and be amazed that these things exist and the petty reasons people have literally built a house. And it's a haunted house story set in a spite house, and you can pre-order it anywhere where books are sold. I'm very similar to what Celso said on the last episode here. If you absolutely have to through Amazon, I'm not gonna begrudge you that. But if you can support your local bookstores, that's obviously much more ideal. So support your local bookstore. It'll be there. You can pre-order it through them, I assure you. And yeah, and then also just to shout out, I'm going to be a part of something sooner. If you're looking for something sooner that I'm going to be in the mix with, coming out October 1st, there is an awesome anthology coming out called Death in the Mouth. And I have a short story that will be appearing there, and I believe is also going to be appearing in Pseudopod about a month or a little more than a month after that, around the Thanksgiving timeframe. We just solidified some discussion on that, and it's Thanksgiving themed. So again, that's Death in the Mouth is the name of that anthology, and you can go to deathinthemouth.com, and there's a bunch of other awesome, fantastic authors that are going to be part of that. It's an illustrated anthology as well. So you get some artwork in there, lots of wonderful stuff to read and sink your eyes and imagination into whenever you're picking that one up. So pick up the Death in the Mouth anthology.
Hell yeah, that's great. And just to piggyback on what you said, your local bookstore can pretty much order anything. And so, like for myself, I'm trying very hard not to support Amazon, and so I found a local Black-owned bookstore in Austin called Black Pearl, and I have been able to get everything from them. Yes, it takes a little bit longer, but I don't need everything tomorrow. I have hundreds of books in this house that I haven't read. And so, just give your local bookstore a chance. Start now and pre-order Johnny's book, and then I will place links to everything that you were talking about in the show notes, so people could very easily just go to the show notes and click on that and be taken to be able to support you and follow you and all that. So
Awesome. Appreciate that.
So Johnny is on to confess his horror sin of never having seen Hour of the Wolf. And so Hour of the Wolf is a movie by Ingmar Bergman, not to be confused with Ingrid Bergman, which in order to not make that mistake, I'm going to just be calling him, I'm just going to be saying Bergman from now on because it's a lot easier.
I do the same thing because I something in my head wants to say Ingrid every single time. I don't know
Yeah.
why.
I mean, she's a great actress, but not who we're talking about, right? So it was written and directed by Bergman. He was a Swedish film director, screenwriter, producer, and playwright. He's widely considered one of the greatest and most influential filmmakers of all time. And his films are known as profoundly personal meditations into the myriad struggles facing the psyche and the soul. I told you he was classing up the place. So, Bergman directed more than 60 films and documentaries for cinematic release and for television screenings, most of which he also wrote. Some of his most acclaimed works include The Seventh Seal from 57, Wild Strawberries in the same year, Virgin Spring from 60, Persona from 66, Cries and Whispers from 72, Scenes from a Marriage from 73, and Fanny and Alexander from 82. So, this movie stars Max von Sydow as Johan Borg, Liv Ullmann as his wife Alma Borg, and then just a really great cast of characters. Gertrude Frith as Corrine von Merkens, George Rydberg as Lindhorst, Erland Josephson as Baron von Merkens, Nema Wifstrand as Old Lady with Hat, and Ulf Johansson as Hirbrand. And there was a bunch of other people who played some really interesting characters, but I think that's the main one there. Oh, and obviously we have to say Ingrid Thulin as Veronica Vogler.
Oh yes,
So,
can't
yeah,
forget her. She proves to be very important in this story.
yeah. So first off, we get the Janus Films logo, so you know you're in for some art house shit. Anytime you see Janus Films, you're like, oh shit, okay. And it's black and white, as is the movie. So I first want to just talk real quick about Janus Films. It's an American film distribution company. The distributor is credited with introducing numerous films now considered masterpieces of world cinema to American audiences, including the films of Michelangelo Antonioni, Sergei Einstein, Federico Fellini, Akira Kurosawa, Francois Truffaut, and of course, Ingmar Bergman, and many other well regarded directors. Bergman's The Seventh Seal was the film responsible for the company's initial growth. So I just thought that was interesting. So,
Yeah, that's fascinating. Like he's kind of the impetus for all of this.
yeah. And so the film starts with an intertitle that states a few years ago, the painter Johan Borg disappeared without a trace from his home on Baltrum in the Frisian Islands. His wife Alma subsequently left me Johan's diary, which she found among his papers. It is this diary, along with Alma's verbal account, that makes up the basis for the film. First off, I wanted to say that Bergman actually shot more. We're going to get to it right now, but there's like a beginning story and an end story, kind of like, what do they call it? Like in an anthology, the through story.
Oh yeah, like the wraparound story.
The wraparound story, right? There's a bit of a wraparound story here, and there was actually more of this that was shot, but he felt that it was getting too personal and drawing away from the actual story, so he cut it down to what we just see in the movie. And then so we get the title card, and then we hear amongst the sounds of people talking, working. It sounds like a grinder or a saw is running. There's hammers, et cetera, et cetera. Then someone says, "Quiet, ready for the take," and then a loud buzzer goes off, and then the words "actions" are yelled. So as I was watching this movie for the second time, I forgot that it started off this way and doesn't come back until the end. And so I was like, okay, I don't really know. I don't know. What did you think about the wraparound story? Did you feel it was necessary? Did you feel like it brought anything to it?
It felt like you said, like there was maybe some extra stuff that was kind of missing. Yeah, that it felt like there was, in like you mentioned, Bergman. This apparently is very a personal story from what I've researched after watching it, because I didn't want to come in here, just completely leaving all the research to you. Like just be like, oh yeah, well that's fascinating. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I was just like, this kind of movie, especially, I'm like that. This is a deep, strange movie.
And it definitely rewards you for second watches because the first watch I had a completely different take on it than the second watch. So
Yeah, definitely, 100%. There was stuff and it's not a very long movie either, but somehow those stuff like from the beginning that like matters tremendously as you go through the movie that I completely forgot in the first time I'd watched it, because when things really do kick into high gear of like the strangeness, it kind of is overwhelming for a little bit.
yes,
But yeah, I'm with you in where I think it seems like you were going with it. Forgive me if I'm being presumptuous. Yeah, it felt like the wraparound story. There was either It kind of landed in an in between zone where it kind of didn't give us as much meat as it could have, so it kind of feels superfluous a little bit, and you can
Mhm.
tell some stuff got cut, and it kind of just feels like, it either needed more of that to kind of beef it up and make it more worthwhile, or if it's not going to be there, then you could have probably just gotten rid of it altogether.
Yeah, I think we would have been fine with her just talking directly to camera without
Hmm.
knowing that it was like a documentary crew or something. But Bergman was making this film as if it were based on true events, but there was no painter named Johan Borg, and in fact, like you said, it was a deeply personal story that he wrote. In fact, inspirations for the story included Bergman's recurring nightmares featuring a woman who took off her own face and an entity that walked on ceilings, which we see later on in the movie, both done to great effect
Fantastic.
that still hold up to this day, and I can't wait to talk about them because, like, wow, right?
Yeah.
Johan's description of being locked in a closet as a boy was based on Bergman's own childhood. An external influence was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's The Magic Flute, with the opera's character Papageno, or Papageno, I'm not sure, I haven't seen it, so I don't know how that's pronounced, transformed into an evil birdman. The Magic Flute is an opera in two acts by Mozart, and the allegorical plot was influenced by Mozart's interest in Freemasonry and concerns the initiation of Prince Tamino.
Yeah, your pronunciation is as good as mine on any of that. I have no clue.
All right. And so, enlisted by the Queen of the Night to rescue her daughter, Pamina, from the high priest Sarastro, Tamino comes to admire the high ideals of the latter, and and Pamina both join Sarastro's community, while the Queen and her allies are vanquished. And so, we get a little bit of that. I mean, especially right now, just reading, Tamino comes to admire the high ideals of the princess that he's there to save. Or, I'm sorry, the Pamina. He's there to save Pamina. Like she talks about. Alma talks about later about why he said why Johan said he liked her, and one of the reasons was because like she is made of one, like she's one whole thing, which I never really understood. But like he liked her ideals, which was kind of following in the Magic Flute,
Hmm.
right? So our first image is of a beautiful country scene. It's a stationary shot of a picnic table with farm fresh eggs overflowing in a basket and a cutting board with half chopped potatoes in the foreground and a rustic cottage which with a thatched roof in the background. And the tree off to the right has lost all the leaves and it looks cold. A woman wearing a sweater walks out of the cabin, putting on a jacket, and approaches the table as the camera sweeps over to meet her. She takes a seat at the table, not having made eye contact with us yet. She looks lost in thought, wringing her hands as she looks off camera. Finally, she breaks the silence and says she has nothing more to tell. She says, I have given you the diary. You're probably wondering why I'm going to stay here. She says that they lived there together for 7 years. Once winter came, she could move to the mainland to get a job, as she's done in the past, to make ends meet. The baby's due in a month. And I thought, ah, shit. I didn't, I don't know if I realized up until this point, like, well, I think it's mentioned here and that's it. I don't remember it coming up at all in the movie. Do you?
Yeah, I don't remember it coming up at all. And then when it, eventually it comes back around at the end, we see her again. There was one angle shot that like you could see that she's pregnant again. I was like, oh yeah, like I'd completely forgot about her being pregnant at all during various sequences of the movie. And
Right.
then like when I saw that shot again, I was like, oh yeah, she's supposed to be like very pregnant. Like somehow this didn't really register very much at all in the throughout the film.
Well, I think it's because we're used to pregnant women nowadays, like, I was gonna say taking it easy, but not taking it easy, just be like more conscious. Like she's out there like doing hard labor work. And to be doing that while you're pregnant is, I would think, would be dangerous to the baby, especially if it's earlier in the pregnancy and all that. So I just was, and then he wasn't treating her. You would think a husband would be happy that their wife is pregnant and they're like all loving and all that. He just wasn't treating her that way. So it was never hinted at what in the movie, and I think that's why I forgot, and maybe that's why you
Yeah,
forgot as
very
well. So
possible because yeah, she doesn't like you said behave in the way I think that we're customarily, it's kind of programmed into us now. Like you said, the way she would, like just be more cognizant of the fact that you're pregnant. Take it easy a little bit,
yeah,
be safe out there. And then like the husband as well, like hey, make sure that you're taking care of your pregnant spouse here. And none of that seems to be happening. And they're also I mean, maybe this is some European stuff. And now I'm thinking about it, like they're also still like drinking wine and shit.
Yes,
like,
exactly,
like
exactly. Yeah.
like there's no thought like at all to being like, oh, maybe you should take it easy with that right now that you're deep into the pregnancy. It's like, hey, pour up some more of this red wine to go with dinner.
So then she says they had planned to stay out there until August, that he did not want to see another human being and he was scared, which led me to believe at the very beginning that it was an isolated island, sparsely populated. But no, motherfuckers kept multiplying. They just kept coming up. And I'm like, where are these people coming from?
Yeah, I mean, I know that's part of what grows the disquieting nature of the film, though. Is like you said, people. It feels like they're multiplying. It feels like one strange person begets more and more. It's almost like they're gremlins, and somebody like they got them wet. And now it's like, oh shit, like we've got 12 of them or something.
Yeah. She then goes on to say that when they arrived, they were happy. They were in good spirits. There was an apple tree in bloom, but then they noticed footprints in a flower bed that they tried to put off and then she just trails off. And this is another thing that didn't really come back, but still, it's like I don't know, it doesn't affect it for me. Like, it doesn't detract from the story. But Johan had been worried about his work not doing well lately. He was having trouble sleeping, which caused him to be afraid of the dark. It had gotten worse the last few years. As she finished the sentence, the scene fades to black. And I was going to say the shot composition is incredible, and this monologue is probably the high point of the movie for me. Like,
Mm.
this actress, she does such a great job with this monologue here. Like, you could feel like it zooms in on her face, and her face is just has a really great character on it. Like, there's not measles, what I was going to say,
Oh yeah, she's got freckles.
freckles. Yes, like
Yeah,
freckles, like there's some age spots, but she's still very like a very pretty woman, and it's I don't know. I thought it was very effective.
she definitely she can command. That's Ullmann, and she's like she could just look at the camera and have this, and the emotion is very present there. It made me think of I just got done watching like I this weekend I watched Pearl. I don't know if you got a chance to see it yet.
Haven't had a chance to see it yet. No. Instead, I took my wife to go see Marcel the Shell, and I actually ended up crying, and I loved it. I got it's an amazing movie, like 5 stars. But I wanted to see Pearl, but I was like, let's go see something we both want to see, and it was
Yeah,
great.
no, I haven't got around to seeing Marcel the Shell, but I heard that's really good. And yeah, I saw Pearl and like talking about like the in kind of like it just reminded me of in Pearl. There's a moment where the camera just stays on Mia Goth's face for a while, and I mean it's a much more her scene is a lot more emotive that because it comes at a different point in the film, and it's kind of the high point of Pearl where she just gets to just kind of do her thing, and the camera's just on her, and she just cuts loose emotionally and says some what she needs to say about her character. And I mean, not completely everything worked for me on Pearl, but Goth's performance in that moment in particular completely worked for me. And it's, I mean, sometimes there's nothing crazy going on. It's just point the camera at this actor or actress and let them cook. And that's what Bergman does to open this one. And I think I completely agree with you that this is like a really just to kind of set the stage and see the emotion of this character that really becomes kind of our only sympathetic figure that we can kind of latch onto as a multitude of people that are very bizarre. Alma, the wife of Johan, she's like our one kind of anchor of okay, this is a somebody who we can actually feel is not trying to drive us crazy in some way or another.
Yeah, and then one of the central driving questions of the movie is whether or not she, in being with her husband Johan for so long, has not is starting to see his visions, have his demons, that sort of thing. And so, is she a reliable narrator or not?
Yeah, completely,
Yeah.
completely.
And the style of certain scenes of the movie has been described as like surreal or near expressionistic or even gothic. And it's funny because I this is my first Bergman, and I could tell already how influential he is based on like 80s and 90s sitcoms that would be whenever they would try to make fun of an art house film, it was always a composition similar to what we see in this movie. There's somebody in the foreground, somebody in the background, just to the left of them. One's talking, looking straight ahead, and the other one's like looking at the camera at us, and just having really deep philosophical conversations. And that's what was going on here. Well, I'm sorry, not in this particular scene, but in other scenes we're going to
Oh
see
yeah,
later. That's what's happening.
several times throughout the movie. Yeah, you're 100% right. Like this, his style became kind of so influential and well known. You're right that like it became the go to for any time somebody's trying to, like you said, kind of make a joke about the nature of art house movies. This is the kind of look, and it's like anything else. You make the joke, and some of it's affectionate or not, and the depth of affection shows how much they actually legitimately try to mimic that composition. But I mean, you kind of some of that stuff he's doing. I mean, some of it helps to just God, man, eye for location. If you got a good location, you make the best of it. Bergman knew what he was doing with that. We eventually get to this weird old decrepit castle in there's a shot where he's like Johan walks in and you can just see the window, the light from the windows kind of filling up the room and the shadows that it's casting and all this other stuff. Like you said, like he just knows, he masterminded knowing what he was doing with that sort of thing.
So the next scene is them actually arriving at the island. They take a minute to unload their belongings, then the small boat that brought them leaves them. We see them carrying their stuff in a wheelbarrow uphill to the cottage. They stop and look at the tree, which is in fact in bloom, as she said at the beginning, and they smile and hug each other, and then they walk inside. Later, they're sitting on their doorstep in an embrace, happy as can be, when Johann says that he wants to draw Alma. She at first says no, very coquettishly, but she's quickly won over by Johann's charm. He actually says, "Up you go, fatty," which is not how you speak to anybody, let alone your wife.
Exactly. We're going to find out very quickly that Johan is not a great husband.
He's
No,
not.
at
He's not a
all.
great person. As she goes to sit by the tree and takes his directions for a pose, the scene fades as he says, "If I patiently drew you day after day,"
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. So later, Alma is hanging up the wash when Johann is arriving from having painted landscapes away from the house. She's happy to see him, running up to him and embracing him for a kiss, but he rebuffs her, continuing to walk in the house. She seems surprised and saddened by this, but quickly shakes it off and puts a smile on her face. She approaches him again for a hug. He grabs her face and gazes into her eyes and pulls her into his chest. But again, no kiss, and then turns away from her, leaving Alma with a very worried face. And I mentioned no kiss here because later on in the movie,
Hmm.
she actually references it. She says that I could probably count the amount of times we kiss
Yeah,
in
she's
my head very
literally says
easily,
we
which is
hardly ever kiss.
amazing.
And then even in that moment, they come close to kissing that later moment. Yep.
And they're interrupted. Yeah. So later at night, Alma is sewing by the lantern while Johann sits behind her. He gets up and starts pacing and making a lot of noise. He goes on to where she's sitting, invading her space, and just like grabs a bottle of wine and pours himself a drink and walks away. Like very rudely. I don't know if it's a European, like maybe Americans have like a bubble. I've heard that we're like we have a bubble where we feel people shouldn't invade that bubble, and he does not care about that at all. Like he just like doesn't even say excuse me, doesn't go around the table, just like puts his hand right in front of her to grab the bottle of wine. I'm like, damn, dude, you're being a dick.
Completely. Yeah, he's like you mentioned earlier, not a good person. And like you said,
Yeah,
it might be a cultural difference, but given what we find out later on about Johan and not very much, further down the road, pretty soon we're going to find out some things. Seems more like this guy just doesn't have respect for um, people's personal space and such.
yeah. So then the whole time, Alma knows something is wrong, but she's trying to keep calm and keep going. She's trying to be the rock for him, which we see her try to do the whole movie. He comes back after grabbing his sketch pad and drops it right in front of her. Again, no respect for her space. And he just starts flipping through it, describing the drawings to her, saying that he hasn't shown them to anybody. My first thought here is that how did he get these drawings if he needed her to sit still for a long time just to get her drawing?
Yeah, I'm imagining these are like,
Like,
especially when he starts describing them and her reaction to them. I love this scene, and I'm imagining that these are very hastily drawn, and also like we talk about, like as we're going to establish, throughout the movie, um, these might be just hallucinations of some kind and just visions and nightmares, waking nightmares he's having. So I imagine there's like a lot of different potential explanations there. We're just kind of meant to figure it out, and kind of have our own personal interpretation of it. But you're right. Like he needs her to get a good sketch of her. He needs her to be still for some time. These people are obviously not being still for him, and in fact are just um in a lot of these descriptions coming up. Apparently, to call them people would be probably stretching the definition.
Yeah, and I feel for me it's like a hint to the fact that he is not a reliable narrator. We should be taking everything he says with a grain of salt. I feel like this is the first inkling of that. And so he describes, as you were saying, the most common drawing that he did is of a man who he believes to
Apropos
be
of nothing,
gay.
by the way, just again, you just like
Right. Yeah,
early
like
early
what needs to
indicators that
happen.
Johan was like, what's with this guy? And granted, it's a different time, right, when the movie came out, but also, it's European. I'm presuming that they had a different perspective and probably tolerance, even back then, of homosexuality and the perspective on it. This art movie, Bergman. There's going to be a different style of history there, and I think we are supposed to glean something from this, especially based on how he again interacts with not just his wife, but everybody pretty much that he encounters and his own thoughts of himself and everything. I think we're supposed to just kind of presume here that there's this weird um, judgmental nature that he has and presumptiveness, and especially given that what's going to come, he's the descriptions of the other people he draws afterward. The only thing about this one person he says about them is, I believe that they're a homosexual. You know, he's basically in the context of this the coming artwork, he's basically equating homosexuality to kind of monstrousness, because what he's going to describe with everybody else is some kind of much
Mm.
more blatant, monstrous feature.
I feel like it's also a slight dig because that character is actually, we come to find out later, involved with the love of his life a bit, right? Like he's actually the one that this man is the one who's having an affair with Veronica Vogler. So maybe he's trying to have a sly dig, and being
Yeah,
gay to him is a dig. I'm not sure, but I
no,
just
yeah,
thought that
definitely.
was
There's
interesting.
something there's a lot to unpack there for sure, because he just throws it out so casually, and you find out later on he's pretty casual with his cruelty.
Yeah. So then he violently flips the pages and describes, the first one describes the old woman in the hat who threatens to take it off, but if she does, her face will go with it. Then he says the worst one, the Birdman. He said he's not sure if it's a real beak or a mask. He says that he must be related to Papageno from the Magic Flute. As he says this, Alma looks back at him with a worried face. And I didn't know if in that face what she was seeing as like the coming storm, or this has happened before and now she's worried that it's going to happen again. But regardless, the look on her face is incredible. Like you're saying, this is an
Oh
incredible
yeah, and
scene.
this is at this moment early on, I was picking up. I was like, oh, this is kind of like proto Shining vibes. Like this is like a precursor. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
totally. I was like,
thank
this is
you.
like, oh man, like creative minded dude, struggling artist trying to work on his stuff, brings his put upon wife, poor unfortunate wife, to this relatively isolated location, and very early on, famously, Stephen King's not a huge fan of Kubrick's version of the Shining, in part because the Nicholson kind of is pretty crazy from the get go, as opposed to in the book where Jack Torrance is supposed to be more of a slow build to him, kind of losing it. I think there's room enough in the world for both of those to be excellent, the novel and the Kubrick visualization of it. But yeah, I was
Yeah.
picking that up like more the movie style here, where it's like, oh man, this guy's, you know, she's got to be worried. She's alone with him. They're on this island. She has no way of getting off the island on her own. Pretty much, it's very similar, like what happens later with the Overlook Hotel, and made me wonder how much of this movie might have influenced King or Kubrick or both, or if this could be just coincidental. I'm sure this is not the first ever story told that features some of these elements, but it definitely gave me Shining vibes early on, and I was just like, oh gosh, poor Alma. Like this is only going to get worse.
Yeah, I believe like if you know your horror or your horror tropes, or you just well versed in horror, you could see that, right? Like somebody who hasn't seen The Shining or hasn't read it, or just stuff like that, like they don't see that. But I'm so glad you picked up on that, because I picked up on it as well, and I was like, wow, this is like two sides of the same coin. You know, you can go real art house with it, or you can go like the way Stephen King did it, and
Yeah,
they're both great.
absolutely. And this made me think of like I was like, this is pretty early in the movie, and this is already kind of her, seeing the all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy kind of moment. And it would be like if he brought the book to her to show her like each page and was like reading it to her, and like that's one of the cool things about this scene too. Like you're describing, he's violently flipping these pages, showing each one, and we never see the sketches. We're just hearing him describe it and seeing her reaction, and it leaves the sketches to your imagination. He's talking about the Birdman. I can't tell if it's a beak or a mask. I'm kind of picturing a plague doctor a little bit, but with the beak part kind of fused to his face more looking maybe, and just looks more disturbing in my mind. And it to me it kind of works better that way. And you can also at the same time though throughout the movie, even though we don't see these sketches, we see some of his other art just kind of plastered around the house and hanging up and things that he's working on. I mean, it even looks like at one point I think he's like it looks like he's even drawing on the walls a little bit. So you can get an idea of his
Yes.
style, but then you have to fill in the blanks of what these exact images look like with your imagination. And I really like the way that he chose to put this together.
Yeah, and there's actually a scene later on in the movie, a very pivotal scene in which his artwork is directly being discussed and the characters are looking at it and we still never see it. I thought it was just such a brave choice. There's a lot of brave choices, like really smart choices made in this movie. Later on, there's a part where they're like literally count down a minute with nothing happening. It's like such a brave choice to happen. Like for a minute in your movie, which seems like eternity. And we'll get to that. I don't want to spoil that part, but the chances that they take, that Bergman takes in this movie, I
Oh
just
yeah,
great,
completely
you
agree.
know. So then he starts flipping the pages faster. He says the flesh eaters, the insects, and especially the Spider-Men. The schoolmaster with the pointing stick in his
Yeah, I
trouser.
know, I know.
Excuse me, I don't know what, I don't know what that one's about, but
Is that a euphemism? What are we talking about?
yeah, let's hope not. So then Alma looks as if she can't believe this is happening again, fretful as to what's to come. He also says the chattering, hard as metal women. And at this point, Alma's not even looking anymore. He's finished, but he implores her to stay awake a little while longer. He says that in an hour it will be day and then he can sleep. So he sits down in front of the camera and puts his head in his hands while Alma continues her work in the background. And this is one of those shots that I was telling you that I was speaking about earlier, that were so influential. And I said on second watch, this has been all one continuous shot.
I didn't even pick up on that. Even like on my second watch, that's a really good call.
Yeah, it just adds so much more to it because you're like, man, they had to remember their lines, and we already know that the actress who plays Alma, Liv Ullmann, she could remember her lines because she had
Yeah,
that whole dialogue, right? So yeah, I was like, wait a minute, there's been no cut so far. So he looks at his watch and says, a minute really is an immense amount of time. He then counts out 10 seconds. Look, I did 4 seconds and it was fucking
I know, right?
long as fuck.
It took me 2 seconds to figure out what was happening. I was like, "Ooh, I wonder if he's going to go the full 10." But it does. It feels like an eternity. That
Yeah, I
like that
couldn't
little
do it.
bit of
I
silence
started sweating
can
in
feel
just
like an
those four
eternity.
seconds. And
Yep.
then he waits for the rest of the minute to go by as we hear the tick, tick, ticking of his watch get louder and louder as the minute stretches on interminably. Alma has stopped breathing. Finally, it's passed and she lets out a breath, almost as if she was unaware she was doing so. He asks her to say something to him. She starts to say that they've lived together for 7 years, but then changes her mind. She then says, isn't it true that people who have lived together their whole lives start to resemble each other when they're old? She says they start to have the same thoughts. And I think, hold on to this thought for later. And then she says that she can't wait until they are so old they share each other's thoughts and they get all wrinkly. But Johan, being the good listener that he is, has fallen asleep. She gets him to bed, taking off his shirt and his shoes and all that, like being the quote unquote good wife sort of thing. So the next morning, she takes the sheets off the bed and puts them outside to wash. As she begins pumping water, she senses something. We even hear the wind picking up a bit here. She turns around and sees an old woman wearing a big hat and a cane. She says not to be frightened, she's not dangerous. And she asks Alma to take her hand and feel the old skin and veins, which Alma does not do.
No. Good job, Alma. Don't do that.
Yeah. And then she says, she's 216 years old after all. Then something dawns on her face and she corrects herself and she says, 76, I mean. Before she leaves, she tells Alma to look in Johan's black satchel where he keeps some drawings. She says, do not let him destroy them, and his diary, which she says to read. And then she's off. And I was just thinking, at this point, I believe she's a ghost or one of Johan's demons. And because they've been together for so long, she's starting to see them as well. So I just wanted to see what you were feeling at this point.
Yeah, on the second watch, because it's really pivotal, I guess kind of a little bit of a jumping ahead, a little bit spoilerish here, but I don't think that lady doesn't show up again. Like all of the other little visions he has, these are recurring characters. This one lady, she just is here for this one time, and then
I was gonna add, that was one of my questions to you because I was like, is that the old lady with the hat, or was it the countess? But no, it wasn't. Right? She was
I don't,
just
yeah, I don't think it was the
okay.
the countess or the old lady with the hat. I think she's a one-off. I think.
Okay,
Now, I could be mistaken because some of these characters, it kind of starts to blend in. The
right.
black and white makes it merge even further. But I think it feels like she's just kind of a one-off. So that's what I was thinking too. I was wondering, kind of like you said, you go back, you rewatch, you start thinking, oh, is Alma having? And she kind of talks about later on, was I too close to him, lived with him too long, started sharing his same visions, Johan's same visions. Why would this lady know about um, the satchel under the bed with the diary? And you could explain that away with a lot of other supernatural happenings. But the thing that jumped out at me was that when we see Alma take the satchel out, it's not like it's particularly well hidden under the bed.
Right.
So it's like it. I was like, well, she would have seen that already, right? And then it kind of clicked to me, like, oh, what if the old lady is really just like a vision Alma's now having, and this is the old lady is just telling her basically, just do it, just go. You need to just go read his diary. Like she would have probably, I'm sure, she's lived with this man for, this is her husband. She knows he keeps a diary. She probably knows where it is already. It's not like it's like super like under a floorboard or something mysteriously hidden. It's in this black satchel that she's seen him carrying. So I'm thinking like the old lady is just kind of her own personal vision or a ghost or something, but just there to reaffirm what she already wants to do,
Oh
basically, just to be
shit.
like,
Okay.
like this is my excuse to go ahead and read his diary, and just to kind of say it was a vision, or maybe it was a vision, maybe it's a some kind of spirit on the island, what have you. I'm always I'm really into old. Not really into. I'm a dilettante level of any kind of anything I talk about. So I always try to be cautious about saying I'm really into anything, and then somebody else could point out the details, and I'm like, okay, I missed that. I don't want to present myself as more knowledgeable than I am. But like it's also they're on this mysterious island. It's in Europe, and they have, even when we talk about spirits and ghosts, they have like elemental kind of spirits and ghosts in a lot of those stories that are like precursors to humanity. Basically, it's like the spirit of the island itself could be the ghost we've been talking about. So you factor in stuff like that that's kind of baked into their culture, so they might not explain it for a foreign audience, but to
That makes
them, it's
sense.
kind of like
Yeah.
rooted there.
Kind of like the yokai in Japanese folklore.
Exactly. This is a thing that yes, so many other cultures have something similar, and like I had just been looking at something else, where there was something similar to that, like in a British story where they were, basically talking about a plot of land that's not haunted by a human being. Somebody's like a ghost hunter and they're trying to find it. And the land isn't haunted by a person; it's haunted by like something that predates humanity and just doesn't want human beings to live there. So it's haunting the house to chase people out because it just doesn't want people there, and it's a part of nature. And like the idea of like that kind of spirit, as opposed to like the more ghostly, traditional, used to be a human, now it's a dead person's spirit living on. This kind of more natural world spirit, it made me think whether it's that too. But either way, I was just thinking like, oh, this lady's just there to reaffirm Alma's growing suspicions already.
Yeah. I really like that. I hadn't thought about it, but now that you say that, I really love that about that. I'm going to choose to say, yeah, that's actually happening. So then, as she walks away, Alma looks around to see where the old lady went, and it's as if she disappeared or was actually never there to begin with. Maybe it was just in her mind, like you were saying.
Exactly.
So then Alma walks back inside the cottage, pretending she's not going to read the diary. She walks around, and this is where, like you were saying earlier, we see this is kind of the only time we see Johan's work, and it's around the cabin. It's on the walls, and he's drawn on the wall, like you said. And then she slowly walks toward the bed, then pulls out the satchel and the diary within it. She looks around as if to make sure she's alone, then she dives in. The first entry she reads is marked July 22nd. Johan's voiceover says he's been ill. The scene switches to Johan as he's once again painting a landscape out by the sea. He hears a car approaching up the hill from him. He sees a man get out and start walking down the hill towards him. As the man gets closer, Johan decides to break down the canvas to leave, uneasy at the man's presence. The man introduces himself as Baron von Merkens, owner of the island, who lives in the old castle on the other side of the island. Can you imagine just being an owner of an island? That's
I
fucking
mean,
ridiculous.
like the whole idea of like he's owner of the island. I live in this giant old castle. Like it's just like that's a whole other like I was like having a fight daydreaming about like you said what would that be like,
Yeah.
what kind of life would that even be?
So there's one thing I'm uncertain about. If these are his demons and or the ghosts or whatever they may be, the castle was still real though, right?
That's a great observation, right? Like I'm gonna say yes,
Yeah.
and I'm gonna say I'm gonna take a second here to a quote that I literally just heard yesterday from an English author. I think his name's Alan Greer, and he said something to the effect of and this is barely related, but I think it matters. Like the idea of play, even if you're seeing phantoms of people or what have you, but the idea of like a place being more real. And Alan Greer talked about when he wrote a lot of ghostly stories, and he said he always tried to put them in places that were real because he felt like, okay, like it almost gives the story a quality of like, I'm not saying these things really happened, but I can tell you where it happened. And I loved that quote, and I was like, "Ooh, that sounds so creepy." Like, hey, this may, and like when you think about every haunted place you ever heard of locally or whatever, or something,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we're supposed to go here, and there's every story is basically kind of like that. At the end of the day, it's like I can't tell you that this is real, but this is the place where it's supposed to have happened, and it's such a simple idea of like grounding something in. I can verify a location. So within the story, I do believe the castle is real, right? And so
Yeah.
then that's Alma then telling when we get kind of the interview that bookends the movie with Alma, and she can basically kind of affirm as well, like, hey, I can't tell you all these people we saw were real or everything else, but I can tell you where these things happened. I can trace you to the places where if it was real, this is where it happened, and that adds to a spookiness for me. I love that you called that out because I do think my interpretation. I think the castle is a real place.
Yeah. Okay. I like that quote. So then he invites Johann and Alma to a quote unquote simple family dinner at the castle. Again, he makes it very clear that it's going to be very simple, but there will be a good wine and salmon. He does not offer time, nor does he say what day it'll be on. It's just as if they know when it will be because they are of the same mind, is what I'm thinking, right? It's
Yes,
Johann's psyche that's telling him this. So, of course, he doesn't need to know when dinner will be served because he already
exactly.
knows, right? So it's again another hint there, I think. So then he walks away, but not before saying that he and his wife are huge fans, because of course Johann couldn't go without somebody saying that they're huge fans of his work.
This totally reinforces the idea that this is his own psyche because we also find out that Johann's ego is, I mean, his pretension and his ego it's fascinating to see. I love earlier even you mentioned like he talks. I'm not, you know what? I'm not going to step on that. I'm sure you're going to come back to it later, so I'm not even going to step on that. My mistake. I'm just so excited to
No
talk about
worries,
some of this
Johnny.
stuff.
Why don't you go ahead and say it? And if I don't, if I don't mention it, then we have it on record. But if I do, I probably won't cut it out. But just go ahead.
Oh well, just like I love that you mentioned earlier. Like Alma mentions, that he had said that Johanna said he loved her because she was like fully formed, She
Yeah.
was a whole being or what have you. But then at the end, when she's talking to him about that, she's like, I thought it sounded beautiful, but then I realized I don't even know what that means. Like you mentioned earlier, like you're like I don't even know what that means. She comes out and says later on, she's like I don't even know what the hell that means. And, like she admits basically it sounded pretty. You're an artist. You can woo somebody with like, oh, these words and this sounds wonderful. And there's a few different instances where Johan says stuff like that, where it sounds like, oh, he's good with words. He's saying some things that sound nice, but then if you really try to dig into the idea of it, you're like, what does this even mean? And does he even know? And I love that she calls him out at the end and just like, I don't even think you really know. Like she's kind of implying like, I don't even think you really know what this stuff means. You're just kind of saying shit.
Yeah.
Um, and like I love that, and I think that ties in all with his his ego, his perception of himself. He just needs to be inflating himself, and so like you said, like he can't if this truly is an extension of his own psyche and his own hallucination. Of course, this person can't leave without saying, "Oh, by the way, huge fan." Which also, by the way, then on top of we had the Shining thing, then I was writing notes too, and I was like, "Oh man!" So now we get like this is kind of a precursor to Shining, and now we're going to get like maybe a hint of Misery in this as well, because they're literally like, "Oh, we're your greatest admirers." They say like something like, basically we're your biggest fans, and I was like, "Oh man, like this is going some places. This is going to be fascinating."
And it's hilarious because it's not the first time, or it's not the only time, I should say, in the movie where somebody says that they're fans of his. In fact, the pivotal plot point in the movie is that one of these people owns a painting of his and they
Yes,
love it and they look at it every day. And it's like, really?
have it in their bedroom,
Have it in a
and
bedroom.
yeah,
Which, oh man, when we get there, let's talk about whether or not it's actually there or not.
yeah.
All right,
It's
let's.
so many cool things
If
to
I don't
think about
remember,
with this.
please remind me.
Yes, I will.
So back at the cabin, Alma is still flipping through the diary, and it's now July 27th, and we flash back to the scene. He's near the water, sketching, but he grows frustrated. In the background, we see a woman slowly approaching him. We only see her legs first, then her torso. Finally, we see her completely as she kneels down, a beautiful blonde woman smiling at him. Johan finally notices her, and she drapes her dress off of one shoulder to reveal her breast, which has a mark on it. She says, "You have to be more careful, my love, or it will end in disaster." Put a pin in that. We're going to come back to that later. She then says she has to show him something. She received a letter that said, "You can't see us, but we can see you. The worst can happen. Dreams can be revealed. The end is near. The wells will run dry and other liquids will moisten your white loins." I'm like, hey, yo.
I know. I was like, yo, that's a wild ending. what, what are we even talking about at this point?
Right. And then she gives him a little wink and like, hey, yo. So it has been decided. As she says this, Johan scoops her face up and kisses her. And I think, oh, so he does like kissing.
Oh, I didn't even piece that together. That's a great call out.
Yeah. And then so she says she says she always gets so excited to see him. It feels as if she's in a dream. Everything else feels unreal and meaningless. And again, this is his inner psyche saying this to him because this is what he wants her to say to him. But it's
Mhm.
really just him, it's just him saying it to himself.
Totally. He's there's nobody more into Johan than Johan. Like
Yeah.
he's very
He
much
was Kanye
satisfying
before
his.
Kanye.
Yes, exactly. He's
I miss
he's
the
his
old
own biggest
Johan.
fan. There's somebody out there saying that, like, man, before Johan kind of went off the rails, man, his early
I
stuff was
miss
the good
the
stuff.
old Johan, the straight out the go
Yeah.
Johan. So she asks him to help her unzip her dress, which he does. And the scene fades as he caresses her naked back. We then see Alma on the bed, still reading the diary. I have to just pause to say real quick. I saw this movie with my wife yesterday, and then I saw it again this morning in preparation. But the first time walkthrough or watch of this movie, I was really confused as far as the timing. It felt like we were jumping back and forth, and I wasn't sure if the like he was having the affair while she was reading the diary. I didn't connect the two, and so that's why I think that rewatching this movie, as I said before, really helps you understand what's going on and rewards you for rewatches.
100%, because I was in the same boat, and I was trying to think like, and part of me was thinking, okay, there's going to be something. I could already kind of feel the vibe of it because even early on, like when just I felt like the pacing or something here, like I was like Bergman's screwing with us some kind of way because we it's so abrupt. Like we didn't mention it, but like it's so abrupt how fast it goes from um him, they show up, they seem happy. He, hey, I'm gonna sketch you, right? And then like the very next time we see there's no like normally there'd be like a montage of him deteriorating or something. The very next time we see him is him in his gloomy mood. And then the next time is like he's already drawing the demon, images in his mind. And so it's like, man, like either the pacing is weird or the timing is weird, or we're gonna find out some of this stuff is like we're going back and forward, like this is like non-linear. So I was already like kind of on my toes and like I was confused, but I was like, okay, there's going to be something weird here with the timing of some of this stuff. Even though she's reading in the diary, we're going to find out.
Mhm.
I was anticipating something kind of off kilter there, and so it was just kind of it's fascinating that you felt that too because I think it's by design and
Mhm.
like you said, it's built to be more rewarding on a second watch. Because I was wondering like is this like an old flame? Is this some kind of going to end up becoming some kind of precursor of the future? Um, I keep using the word precursor. I gotta stop doing it. I don't even think I used it in the right context that time. I think predictor of the future is what I was trying to say. Sometimes you get like locked in a loop on a word. I don't know why that
Trust,
happens to me
understand.
anyway. But it was like just in my head already to anticipate something bizarre is going to happen with the timing here because the pacing was already kind of throwing me a little bit.
Yeah. So then in another entry, Johan is walking and we can hear loud breathing behind him. This is a wild scene. A man is trying to keep up with Johan, who is not interested in speaking to this man. The man wears a beret, dark rimmed glasses, and an overcoat. The man says that this is a great spot to paint. He says Johan has lived here for a long time. And I was thinking, so they said they lived here for 7 years or lived together for
Hmm.
7 years. And so it seems what happens is that they live off island during winter and then come back during spring. Is that what you were getting?
I was there had to be something like that, right? I was trying to figure out exactly what how long have they been on the island? Are they on the island this entire time? Yeah, it was hard to piece that together. Again, I think by design you're supposed to kind of feel like the time is all merging together. But I think your explanation is probably the most sensible one because she does mention again, like you mentioned, later on, her going to the or what you mentioned earlier, but her going off island to find work when during the working season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's what I'm presuming has to be the case
Okay.
here. But yeah, it's like it's just hard to tell like what their exact timeline is.
Yeah, I think the this one of the smarter things he does is make her pregnant because we know that there's at least a minimum 9 months where they're like, we can tell where we're in the story, right? Because
Yeah,
if she had a baby, we'd be like, okay, it's after the 9 months. But if it's before, it was before she was pregnant. So I think that was a good. I mean, they didn't make it very clear like throughout the movie, like we said earlier, but I think it was some what do they call them, like signposts on the road that were a bit helpful for that.
for
The man
sure.
says
Yep,
that he keeps returning to the scene of the crime and committing new crimes. So I think he thought that this was more clever than it was because he laughs to himself. So as they're walking, the sea is in the background and it looks absolutely stunning. It's just a
oh,
great shot. Like the
terrific shot,
cinematography is so good.
amazing. Some of the shots on this are just fantastic. If you got good scenery and you can make the best of it, I mean, he totally does that. Oh gosh, the later scene I'm sure you're going to mention, but the later scene where there's also the moon in the background.
Yes.
You get to see the sea and foregrounded with the island and the sea and then the moon above it all is just fantastic.
Yeah. And so the man introduces himself as Hirbrand, school counselor, which throwback to just a couple scenes ago. He said the school counselor was the one with the was a yardstick in his pants or whatever.
Yes, the stick in his
Yes.
a stick in his trousers, whatever that. Maybe that sounds sexier in Swedish. I don't know. Maybe maybe that's one of those that gets lost in
Oh
translation.
yeah, maybe. So he says, and then he goes on to say that he probes people's souls and turns their insides out. It's like, hey, keep that in your keep that in your pants. No probe.
That's a much grimmer version of the euphemism than
Yeah.
than we needed to hear.
So I just think it's like an interesting thing to say to someone you've just met. And this whole time, Johan is not with the shits. He wants nothing to do with Hirbrand. He asks Johan, why is he looking at him like that? Is he angry at him? Are his nerves okay? And Johan rears back and slaps the shit out of him like he owed him money. Like, it was bad. Like, the guy, he falls to the ground and Johan yells at him to shut up, shut up. And the man just lies down and takes his L and puts a handkerchief to his nose to stop the bleeding. And I just thought, wow, like, I was not expecting that. What did you think when this happened?
I completely the same. It was like the first shock moment of I think the movie for me. I was like, oh man, like I didn't know what I thought was going to happen, but I definitely didn't expect Johan to just turn around, slap the guy down, like you said, scream at him to shut up, watch the guy lay back, and even the way the guy lays back is just kind of it just something about his mannerisms even then is kind of odd. He just lays back, puts the tissue, the handkerchief rather, to his nose to stop the bleeding, and it's just like, okay, I guess that just happened. That was wild.
And the funny thing is, like, Johan is standing over him like Muhammad Ali. Like, if you get up again, I'm gonna dust your ass. Do not
Yeah,
get up.
you thought that first slap was bad. Just wait, just wait. I got another one locked and loaded, buddy.
Exactly. So it's so cool. So then we see Alma quickly. Sorry, we switch back to Alma. We see her quickly putting away the diary as Johan walks in the room, and then they sit at the table to eat. Johan pouring them both some wine, which you said she's pregnant, but okay. Fetal alcohol syndrome.
I
So
mean, yeah, I guess again, from what I understand, I guess maybe in Europe it was back then. They're like, ah, no, wine's good for the baby.
yeah,
It's great for it's great for the fetus. Are you kidding me?
it gets him to shut up.
Exactly. Well, they probably were like blaming birth defects on like, oh, you probably weren't drinking enough wine. Oh no, you didn't drink enough wine. Oh, that's why your kid's gonna get like a congenital heart condition because of that. Oh, you got to drink more wine during pregnancy.
Yeah, it's terrible. But I mean, every day we're assuming every day they have it. They have wine with their dinner at least.
It looks like standard with dinner.
Yeah,
Just so like no water in sight. Just hey, we're gonna have a little bit of wine to go with
there's
dinner tonight,
water in
like
wine.
always. Fair, fair. Like I'm not giving them credit. They are hydrating actually in their own roundabout way.
So then Alma then says that she needs more money, with Johan immediately handing her some. But she asks him to please review her accounting while she runs down a list of all their expenses and how she spent that money down to the penny, or whatever their currency was at that time. So he pays her absolutely no mind, dismissive as ever. But she continues on, and it's really very tragic to see. She's desperate for his approval and for any sort of human interaction. She actually says a certain amount went to his boy's birthday present, so that means that he has a child with another woman. Okay,
Mhm.
so I'm thinking the real off island Veronica, maybe he had a child with her. We don't know.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Like and we find out later on they lived with each other for several years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you find out there's like more sordid details to their affair.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a really good scene for informing us about that, and then just again reinforcing, like you said, his dismissiveness. I loved that, just the way this kind of juxtaposes. When I was writing some notes on it, I was like, oh, like this is a good contrast between earlier when he's going through. He's showing her something so unpleasant with all these grotesque images that he's been
Right.
drawing, and he's like forcing her to see it basically, and then forcing her to stay awake with him because he has insomnia. And she's showing him, she wants to talk to him about, hey, like I'm doing important accounting for the household, like don't just throw money at me, like I want you to know, like this is where our expenditures, I'm budgeting, here's the
Mm-hmm.
ledger, right? I'm showing you where everything goes, which is really important. I get like his psychological manifestations are important to him. This is also from a very practical standpoint incredibly important. He should be paying attention to this, and he could not be more disinterested. And it just, the the way that contrasts, I just found really fascinating, and just kind of emphasizing how self-centered and callous and just emotionally detached from her he really is. He can't pay attention, even just pretend to pay attention, just for the sake of, oh yeah, this actually is important to the house. Even if you're not interested in specifically her, you should at least be able to just fake it, just from the standpoint of this is actually important to know where our money's going. And instead he's just like, oh, you say you need more money, sure, whatever, this will shut you up.
Yeah. So again, we're finding out more about Johan and what a dick he is. So again, she asks him to check if it's right, but he just closes her book and keeps on eating. The look on Alma's face is devastating. And he finally tells Alma about the dinner at the castle, and she says she knows. Johan asks her how she knows, and she leaves the table crying.
Yes, I love that. I love that she, like she doesn't get a whole lot of great victories against him, but she gets a small one here of just, you know what, I'm not going to tell you. Fuck off. You don't even want to like look at I did the numbers. I'm doing accounting over here for God's sake for the house. Like I'm keeping up and make sure we're not going to get out of budget and get out of whack while we're by ourselves here on this island. Pretty important to know where the money's going. And yeah, then I've been reading your diary, but I'm not even going to tell you. Whatever, sure, I know about.
But I
this.
think also he doesn't want to know how she knows, because if he knows that she's read the diary, then that also means that she's read about her about Veronica. And so he
Yeah,
probably is like, I don't want to touch that, so we're just going to leave it. It's like a tete-a-tete, right? They both
yeah,
have they both have information against each other that they, or actually, it's like a mutual truce. Neither one wants to have a fight right now.
yeah, totally.
So next we're at the castle and we see the Baron again. Who introduces the rest of the dinner guests. His wife, Corrine von Merkens, his mother, Countess von Merkens, his brother, Ernst von Merkens, who's a weird dude already. Don't like him at all. The archivist, Lyndhurst, one name like Madonna or Beyonce, and Counselor Hairbrand, who was the dude he bitch slapped earlier. And so I thought here, oh, wait, if he works at school, then there's enough population on the island to support a school? Or does he just live here during the summer?
And who knows?
Yeah,
Because as we're going to find out later, there's at least one kid,
right.
also apparently on the island, but
Yeah.
that's an entirely
I can't wait to get to that.
stranger. Yeah, yeah. That was literally the moment in the movie where I was like, oh, this we're taking things up another notch that I fully did not expect.
Yeah. So then Hirbrand does say that they've met each other before, but leaves it at that. And so they finally sit down to their quote unquote simple dinner, which is like fine china and like silverware and like candelabras and like very fine cooking with a maid who they complain about. It's like, fuck you. So the conversation and the wine are flowing. Everyone seems to be talking at Johan. Sorry. Everyone seems to be talking at Johan and Alma at once, making them feel very uneasy. They will ask them questions and then not allow them to answer. The Baron tells a story of buying a painting from a well known artist and hanging it upside down to embarrass the artist when he saw it. He says that they all walked in on, no, I'm sorry, they hung it upside down, and when the artist came in, they all laughed. He then asks Mr. Artist if it was a good joke, and the table erupts in laughter. So I wanted to like put ourselves in Alma's point of view. Like at this point, she probably knows that the island is isolated, nobody's on it, and yet she's in this castle being addressed by ghosts and being able to speak to them as well. And so you could see the look on her eyes. The whole dinner is like one of bewilderments.
It's so overwhelming. It's like you said that everybody's talking at them. They're talking over each other, part of the time. Um, and you almost can't even really grasp it from us as me as an English speaker. I don't know any Swedish at all. It's one of those things where like this is like the one time in the movie where I was like, damn, I wish I knew the language so I didn't have to watch this with like the subtitles, because the subtitles can't
Yeah.
fully capture their overlapping conversations and how rapid it really is. You're reading it in subtitles and it makes it slightly less. It still feels like chaos, but it makes it slightly less chaotic. And like I was sitting there thinking, like this feels like. Did you ever see Uncut Gems?
Yes. Yes, I have.
It felt like a lot of the conversations in Uncut Gems where it's like, man, this is making me anxious just because everybody just stop, just let one person talk at a time. Like, guys, if we can, if this person's telling a story, it doesn't need everybody telling a story. So yeah, I feel her anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
and then just a little thing, but they also just a little strange thing that they do at this little dinner party. They don't sit Johan and Alma right next to each other,
Right.
which would never happen in real life.
Yeah,
This is
they. Oh shit! It just goes. She says later in the movie that they're trying to separate them.
yes, and like she mentions that specifically, and then at this dinner, I noticed I was like, this is like so weird. Like you would, and this is obviously like deliberate, and like you said, it ties in later on. They say, she says like they're trying to separate us, and yeah, like they don't like if you had guests at a dinner party and you're the host of a lavish castle, you wouldn't be like, okay, like I'm gonna sit a stranger right in between the two of you so that you can't even just kind of lean on each other at some point if the conversation gets awkward or something that it gets too insular or something you don't know about. You can't even just kind of like hold each other's hand or anything. Like
Mm.
they're literally divided at the dinner party, which again in real life, unless I'm just this is like a Swedish custom that I'm unfamiliar with.
Yeah,
But like I've never seen that before, and I picked up on that in the midst of it, and I was like, oh wow, this is really like a strange way to do this. And then later on, like you said, she specifically calls out they're trying to separate us, and I was like, yep, they are definitely trying to enact that divide, and that ties back into that.
yeah. That's such a great point. I hadn't even realized that. You great points. Thank you so much for like doing your research and like you said watching it twice. I'm like I said, you just I got so much more just watching a second time. So I could tell you did as well.
Yeah, it's so rewarding to watch a second time and kind of like get things a little bit more crystallized. But it's a movie that's designed to also, even if you watch it a second time, still like have so much left open to interpretation.
Yeah. And then so the Baron seems to be very antagonistic towards Johan. And so one of the funnier lines is that Corrine says she says she's constantly losing weight. She's had to consult doctors about it. Sometimes it stops as it has this summer. And I'm like, uh-huh, yeah, sure. But it starts up again. And she is like literally and figuratively feeling herself. Like she's rubbing her shoulders and her upper chest.
Yes,
And then she mentions the family money, which sets Ernst off, saying how they blame him for losing the family's money. All of this while the Baron is glaring at Alma. And Corinne goes on to say that they do have two boys who live with an uncle. The uncle's family are acquaintances of Johann's. He says, "You must know Veronica Vogler very well from what she's heard." And so, like, the Baroness, or I'm sorry, Corinne is trying to spill the tea. Like, she's trying to start shit up.
yep,
That's
totally.
all
She
she does
and
this whole party is trying to start shit between between Alma and Johan, which goes back to the
yes,
point about trying to separate them.
totally, and it just gets her efforts get increasingly brazen as it
Yeah.
goes along.
So the Baron then says Veronica Vogler is a beautiful woman and asks Alma if she's met her. Alma, unable to speak, just shakes her head no. The Baron is surprised that she doesn't, then says, "Such hatred in those eyes." And again, the whole table erupts in laughter.
It's again, I just want to emphasize people. You gotta. This is why this is such a cool podcast because we talk through this stuff in detail, but then the way you lay it out in such detail is so fantastic. But then we can come back and tell people hearing the description doesn't quite do it justice because
Right.
like what you're talking about, all these conversations, it's so disjointed and manic, and like it's just overwhelming almost. And then you have to kind of pick apart the parts that are like, oh, this is the critical part here. This is the the part where she like mentioned like she sets off the anger of her brother with talking about the money, and there's all these other weird brief snippets of conversation. Then you have to pinpoint like, oh no, this is the part here though when they start talking about Veronica Vogler again. This is where it's like we're back into locked in and what's going to matter to the story down the road more
Yeah,
so.
exactly. So then Johan seems to be very affected by the events, perhaps having had a bit too much to drink. But of course, he pours himself some more wine. Then they all retire to the library for coffee. Ernst slapping his hand on Johan's shoulder, which Johan promptly removes.
Yes, yes.
So then Johan and Alma stay back for a second to gather themselves, Johan placing her shawl over her shoulders, which I thought was one of the more touching scenes between them two because he doesn't really show affection very much.
No, but I just it just occurred to me. What just going back a few seconds here, you mentioned hand on the shoulder, Johan immediately removes. Earlier, you mentioned it feels like Johan doesn't respect other people's personal space, but he's very protective of his own personal space.
Okay, yeah.
He's not the guy following him. He slaps a man for following him. and talking to him too much.
Shit, that's
And
right. Yeah.
like, this guy, as soon as he puts like the affectionate, oh, trying to be, oh, with some camaraderie, we're just having a good time here, hand on the shoulder. He's like, no, he immediately is like, get that hand off my shoulder. But meanwhile, with his own spouse in their house, he's like you pointed out earlier, like just feels like he's very disrespectful of her personal space and just lacking awareness on it. And then again, it's just kind of more evidence of like everything's about Johan to him. Everything's about himself. And for me, hey, back up, give me my space. But for my own spouse, I might step all over your little your bubble here
Yeah.
to just go get some more wine or whatever I want to get.
Oh, man. The more I talk about this movie, the more I love it, and also the more I hate Johan.
Yeah, oh yeah, like I'm sitting here thinking, like I'm gonna have to give it a third watch here, but like yeah, like it's the second watch was really crystallizing for me, and like now this discussion, like you said too,
Yeah.
I was like, damn, like Johan, like you said, he's a real dick, a total prick.
So then they walk into an amazing library, floor to ceiling with books, and the ceilings are like 20 feet high. It's the dream, like my dream library to have in a house.
100%. I saw that. I was just like, oh my god, this is an incredible library.
Yeah.
This is better than like any like actual public library I've ever been to. This is
Yes.
fantastic.
So the Baron is going to put on a puppet show for them, which is very random, but he invites the guests of honor to stand in front. Then he goes behind the like stage, the little puppet stage that he has, draws the curtain. Then the puppet is brought out on the stage. I say puppet, quote unquote puppet, right? Because they're brought on the stage and they sing the magic flute. And it's a cool effect because it's not actually a puppet, but it's a real person, which
Yes,
was just like shot to make it look like he's a puppet. And so when it starts to move and sing, and it doesn't move that much, it doesn't put on a damn show or anything, but still, the effect is pretty good.
it's really good. It was really eerie because they're still for a little while, and I was watching it thinking like, is that a real? That doesn't look like a puppet. Is that like a cutout or anything? Is that like a real dude? And then they're just holding their arms kind of raised a little bit for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and then they slowly start to move. Like you said, they don't move much, but it's just enough to be like, oh, like that's clearly not a puppet. And so then it makes you kind of, again, just one of those things where you just kind of have to wonder, like, what's the interpretation here? Like his alleged puppet show involves like, you know is it meant to be like, well, we're just using this as an effect, or is it like, which it's Bergman, so there's probably a deeper meaning, and it's really more, I'm interpreting it as like, okay, we like, it's treating a human being as a puppet is not exactly a subtle message, but like if you do it in a artistic and effective fashion like this, the fact that it's not subtle doesn't is immaterial, right? Like it's just like you said, it's like a really cool image and really unsettling. That was like
Mm-hmm.
one of the first moments for me where it really felt like, oh, like, because prior to this it felt like this is a kind of chaotic psychodrama. It
Right.
didn't feel like full on horror, to a certain extent. And this is one of the earliest moments for me, or one of the first moments rather for me, where I was like, this is starting to really feel like a horror story. Like the idea of like a living puppet, whether it's an effect or it's meant to be something kind of deeper or not. Like just the visual of it. This is some horror movie shit.
Yeah, and it doesn't like your to your point, it feels like a drama. It's a slow burn up until the last, I would say like 10 minutes, 10-15 minutes of the movie. And
Yeah,
then it
there's
kind of goes down. It gets to the point where it's just a surreal dream, as you're just walking through somebody's actual nightmare, which is
yeah,
what
totally.
what Bergman was going for, because that's what it was based off of, his
Yeah.
nightmares.
When he turns on the horror aspects of it, like you said, in that last about 15 minutes or so, I mean, it builds up. Even like I was like, man, like there's a mark in there about an hour in, so about almost 30 minutes before the end of the movie, there's a, which we're going to get to, there's a huge turning point, a huge revelation. And I was like, oh, like we're starting to get to like some real horror movie shit now. And then like he ramps it up and ramps it up, and it's a really cool and clever way of making a horror movie to where that last, like you said, 15 minutes or so, I felt like my stomach kind of starting to twist with some of the stuff where it was like the visuals and what's taking place. I was like, this is like a different sensation than the usual, which I love, but like your jump scares or your more overt spooky settings and stuff. I was like, this is a different way to do this, and it's really like disturbing me in a way that I haven't felt like quite this disturbed in this specific way that I can really ever recall.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait. Like there's all these I'm having so much fun. I can't wait to get to the end of that scene. So let's
Yeah.
keep going. So everyone looks on in amazement except for Johan, who has his eyes closed, which I didn't catch the first time. I caught it on the second watch.
Mm,
And then we see the Baron behind the stage, but he's not actually doing anything. He's just looking out over his audience. So then who's making the puppet move? So that's another like makes you feel uneasy, right?
hmm
So then we get a beautiful close up of Alma's face, almost in tears. And the Baron describes the opera, saying how good it is. He's quoting the play, which goes, "O eternal night, when will you come to an end? When shall the light find my eyes?" So, of course, we're going to find out later is that he's having trouble sleeping. So that's
hmm
why they stay up in the middle of the night. The middle of the night is called the hour of the wolf, and they're waiting for that light to catch his eye so that he can fall asleep.
Yeah.
Right.
It's the themes start to, gel more and
Mhm.
more like as this is going along for sure.
So the choir responds. They sing "Soon, Soon, Youth," or "Never." And Johann has been having trouble sleeping. And oh, sorry, I said that part already. So then the Baron goes on to say that it's the greatest piece of art ever produced, isn't it? Isn't that so, Mr. Artist? He says again. And Johann, put on the spot, asks them to forgive him. He calls himself an artist, for lack of a better word. He says, through no intent of his own, he's been singled out as something special, a 5-legged calf, a monster. He never wanted that distinction. He says he has felt like a megalomaniac before, but he needed only consider the insignificance of art in the human world to be brought back down to earth. Then they all clap and they say, "Oh, spoken like a true artist." But I'm like, they like the self-deprecating shit, huh? But like we all know that he really was feeling himself. He just knew that he had to say that at that point, you
I
know?
mean, but what a tool. God, like
Yes,
I was
exactly.
watching that scene because even like it's self-deprecating in a non-self-deprecating way. It's like when you go to a job interview and they're like, "What's your biggest weakness?" and you're like, "I'm just I sometimes I get too focused on details.
I'm a
I'm
perfectionist.
yeah, I'm a perfectionist. Sometimes I just try so hard that it's like, man, just got to relax." And it's like that's not really a weakness.
Uh,
You didn't describe a weakness at all, like, which is probably a loaded, stupid question for an interview anyway. But like, yeah, like he's like, "Oh, I didn't ask to be special, but somehow I managed to be special. That's it is what it is." Like that's not like you said. It's self-deprecating. It's as close as he can get to it, but it's still like, oh, I guess I'm a freak. I'm a 5-legged calf. Like even even like that description. I was thinking like, okay, like it's a freakish thing, but it's not like a I don't know. It makes you unique and special, but not in any kind of way that like would it's not like he's called himself like a 3-legged calf or something. You know what I mean? Like he didn't take anything away. He
right.
he
He
added
added to
something
the
to his description to be
yeah.
like, this is how I'm a weirdo. I have this extra, I have an extra a part of me. Like I was born with something more. What can I say? I was like, oh, what a freak! Oh God, even the first time watching it, he goes into that little speech. The first time I watched it, I was like, oh, this freaking guy.
I love your description of him as a tool. I think that's the best description we can say of him at this point right
But
now.
could you just imagine being at a party and that guy is there and like there's that moment? If you were there and you heard a guy saying stuff like, you would be like, oh my,
You
where's
roll
my
your eyes
coat?
and walk out of the room. You're like,
Yeah,
oh
you'd be like,
jeez.
I'm just gonna leave. I
Or if
didn't
it's your
realize we were,
friend, you're like, really, dude? Really? Did you just say
dude.
that?
Did you just say that?
Yeah.
5-legged calf, get the fuck out of here.
So then Alma, however, is still very uneasy. And I wanted to check with you to see because I don't agree with the statement because he says that artwork is insignificant in the human world. Because if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that artists make the world go round, right? Because we all went in our stayed home, watched movies, read books, listened to music in order to survive, right? That's
Yeah.
artist, that's artwork that was provided to the world throughout this pandemic. So I don't agree with that fact, and I wanted to see what how you felt about that.
No, I'm with you. I do think that we've seen, and it's like you said, the pandemic shows it. If you look at history, like the theaters remaining open during like World War II, and different calamities that humanity has faced, and we always try to find some kind of artistic entertainment, cultural outlet. um, we wanted, through the depression, people were still going to, finding ways to go to the movies, and fascinating to read about some of that stuff, and like finding ways to like, I need this outlet.
Yeah.
And it's really vital, I think, to the human experience of life, is to find ways to channel and interpret reality in some kind of creative way, to kind of escape, the harsher confines of just direct absolute reality. So it's one of those things, again, where it's kind of like a, you know are we examining the psyche, and like you said, the unreliable kind of, especially as all of this seems to be, the theory possibility that we've talked about, that I love, that all of this is kind of in some way or another an extension of um, Johan's own psychosis, and Alma's shared kind of psychosis with him eventually.
Mhm.
um and then, like you said earlier, like, this is an unreliable narrator, so then regardless of who's saying anything, just having to filter it through, do they even mean it, what is their real intention behind saying it, etc.
Yeah, and it even goes to show that he doesn't even believe the shit that he just said, because
Yeah,
he's an artist and he requires people to buy his art in order to survive. And so, yeah,
totally. Yeah, he, and again, like, it's, you don't really feel like he's being sincere when he says certain things
yeah,
like that, because we his behavior indicates a certain level of egotism and selfishness that you can't just kind of talk your way
so then
out of.
after toasting Johann, the Countess grabs his face from behind and starts rubbing a rose over it, scratching him with her nail and drawing blood in the process. And then she tries very roughly to clean it off, but he pushes her away. And then as he does so, Alma very quickly grabs him and reminds him to stay calm. She then tells the rest of the party that he doesn't sleep very well at night and he's drunk too much tonight and they need to get some air. And then they all laugh at him again. So like this series of events is like they are line steppers. They're habitual line steppers.
Yes, they're all Rick James.
Yes, exactly. And the one got slapped for it. But
Yes.
but it's like, what are you thinking? Like, how is
I,
that normal behavior to grab somebody's face and just start rubbing a flower over it? It's very
rubbing
weird.
it like a rose, and I think she, like you said, she scratched him with the nail, but at the first time I couldn't even tell. Like, I was like, did she scratch him with the
The
thorn?
thorn, right, right.
Right, and like, which, we'll talk about, but it comes into play later in a much more deliberate fashion. But yeah, you're right. Like, none of this is even close to normal behavior. And this is where it really, my sympathy for Alma started really ratcheting up, because Johan, you totally get the vibe of Johan just being like, these people are like really aggressively um, uncomfortable to be around, but they're also singing my praises, and constantly referring to me as Mr. Artist. They hardly ever call him just Johan. They're just like Mr. Artist this and Mr. Artist
Yeah.
that. And it sounds like it could be sarcastic, but maybe not. And he's such an egomaniac that he's like, I'm willing to put up with a lot of shit if I'm going to be able to be around people that claim to be my biggest admirers.
Yeah. So then on the stroll in the country, the archivist tells them about the history of the family, the castle, and the island. Alma stops Johann and says, "We never kiss. Have you noticed that? I can almost count our kisses." And then Johann, once again stroking her face, goes in for a kiss, but is interrupted by Hirbrand, who is recounting their first encounter. He does not call out Johann by name, but he says that afterwards he was just thinking, is this how it is? Does it have to be like this? And Johann seems very put off by this. And then Alma and Johann look at each other knowingly because she read about this this incident in his diary.
Yes.
And so I think now that there's no more secrets, they both know that she's read his diary.
Yes, exactly. And it's like you said before, it was kind of like we're trying to have like kind of, okay, truce. I don't want to know. You don't want to talk about it. We can kind of mutually agree to just kind of leave this unspoken between us. And now it starts to becoming, it gets to a point now where it becomes harder to ignore.
Mm-hmm. Until they can't ignore it anymore, and then
Yeah.
that blows up later on.
Yeah. Eventually this is going to blow up in rather horrific fashion.
Yeah. So then back in the castle, Johann and Alma are leaving, but Corinne demands they see a painting that she has of Johann's that she keeps in the bedroom. It's of Veronica Vogler, his former lover. In the bedroom,
Hmm.
Corinne shows that the painting is right across from her bed, where she can stare at it day and night, which helps her loneliness. She says she loves her. Alma stays back, never getting too close to the painting, but Johan is enthralled by it and walks right up to it. We, as the audience, actually never see the painting. And Corinne asks Johan how long he and Veronica lived together, and Alma answers 5 years. She then asks Alma if he loved Veronica, but she doesn't need the answer because she knows. She speaks of the scandal and asks Alma if she's jealous, to which she responds no. This is some nefarious shit right here. What she's doing, it's so rude,
It's so
and
fucked up.
she's like prodding them, like again trying to separate them, trying to get her angry at him. You know?
Yeah, now it's like, I mean, I keep going to all these different references of things, but now it's like a brief detour into like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf and shit. Like it's like,
Yes. Oh my god.
you
Yeah.
know, like yeah, it's like, oh, wait, I've got, you know, the lady of the manor is like, I'm gonna screw with this couple a little bit here, and you know, kind of tour, especially the young woman, the wife, because you know Johan is kind of like you said, he walks right up to it. Of course, he's going to. He painted it. I'm sure he's just like, oh man, this is amazing work. Whoever did this is a genius. Oh, yeah, that's right, it's me. Haha. You know, like he's not thinking of any. And Alma, meanwhile, is over here having to confront, like, oh yeah, his ex lover that I just read about in a diary is, you know, he's still, you know, seeing, obsessed with something, right? We're going to find out later. We don't even, yeah, I've got questions about the nature of, even just, we'll talk about later with Veronica Vogler, but Alma's having to deal with that. You know, the Countess, you know, she also like does the, oh wait, I think we haven't gotten to it yet, so I don't want to step on it too much, but like, you know, she kind of even acts a little bit flirtatious in a way that she echoes some things that Veronica Vogler um,
Yes.
did
Yes.
to
Yeah.
Johan, you know, from the diary entry. And yeah, this is like really nefarious. Nefarious is a perfect word for it. You picked the perfect word for it.
So my question to you is Alma seeing this painting, the painting of Veronica Vogler?
Because she's staring at, like you
Or
said,
is she staring? Is her unease at the painting because her husband is obviously reacting to something, and so is the spirit? Or is she actually seeing? We don't know. Like he leaves it up to the viewer, which I love when a director or a writer trusts their audience enough to not hand them everything. Sometimes
yes,
it's necessary to the story, to the plot, to tell us what's happening so that we're not in the dark. But sometimes it isn't. This is one of the times in which it isn't. And it's used to great effect.
terrific effect. And I completely agree. And you're left to wonder. I really don't, like, I don't know. Like, it's weird to like not have an interpretation, I guess, my own
Mm.
personal one. But I mean, I guess I think she's seeing the painting, but it could really go either way. And I think it's kind of I think it's fascinating. It's kind of almost a sliding doors kind of thing. Like at that point in the story, is she, you know, where's her mentality at and where's it going to go? And kind of the idea of whether or not she sees this thing, which, as you pointed out, like we never see. And I remember kind of the first time watching it, kind of sitting there waiting, like, okay, they're gonna show this, and there's gonna be something unusual or
Yeah.
bizarre about it, you know.
I was
And
thinking it was going to be a picture of Dorian Gray sort of scenario.
I was like thinking that, or it's like it's going to be something where, because they're talking about it, they're talking it up so much, and I was like, they're going to reveal this, and it's going to be like barely even distinguishable as a human being, you know. And
Imagine if it was just a stick figure.
that's what I was thinking, like almost like it's going to be like this is going to be, and like almost confusion is also going to be like, what the fuck, like is this, who am I even with? Is this like he's not even really like good,
Yeah.
or like they're not even describing what I'm seeing,
It
and
would be a completely different movie if she just loses respect for him as an artist because he sucks and just leaves. That's the movie we should have got there.
yeah, that would be awesome if she just realizes, like, wait a minute, like this is actually
He's a
trash.
hack. He's a hack.
This is bullshit. Oh, that earlier sketch, you know, like when you showed me those sketches earlier, I wasn't frightened. Okay, I was like just appalled at how juvenile this was. Okay, a
Yeah.
man with a stick in his trousers, grow up.
She's like Danny DeVito in It's Always Sunny. Bullshit,
Yeah,
bullshit, bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, that would be like an amazing different interpretation of this movie.
Yeah. So then Corrine says that her husband is the jealous type, but also an excellent lover. Then, for some reason, she shows them a mark on her inner thigh and says it's a scar from another man's, shall we say, advances. And then she looks at Johan, who looks at her and walks away. But Alma knows what it means. And it's just like the mark that was on Veronica earlier, which
Hmm.
you mentioned. And I didn't catch that till the second watch. I was like, oh, fuck. He's, well, I guess when he fucked Veronica, he was in his mind, but he also fucked this girl in his mind too. It was like, holy crap.
Yeah, totally. Like,
Great. Just a
does
great callback.
yeah, it's perfect. I was like, oh shit, like this is like really the layers on top of this. This is so
And
like
then
screwed up.
she then asks Johan to help her out of her dress. Then looks at Alma and says, I'm only kidding. And this bitch needs to have her face rearranged. Because again, she is one of those habitual line steppers, and you just got to put them in their place.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, she's way over
Way
the
out of
line
line.
at this point, and like also the help me out of my dress thing. That again is something Veronica had him do
Oh,
in the diary
right,
entry.
right. Yeah.
So she's echoing that again, and it's like that was I was like, okay, yeah, this is like, and like you said also, yeah, like she's just way out of pocket here.
So as they walk out, Corrine grabs Alma and leads her to the painting because, of course, we saw Alma was trying to stay away from it. She leads her closer to the painting, saying she's at least bought a significant part of Johann. Yes, and then Alma stays to stare, possibly at the painting. What a fucking scene! Like, just
It's
I mean, if this was just if they didn't make it into a horror movie in the last half, like this scene itself is just like I don't know, man. This movie is so good. I'm just
yeah,
loving it so far.
yeah, it's riveting. It's like that part. I was just like, what? Like, oh my god! And like you said, it's just you're watching the Alma have to like kind of stew with all of this and just deal with it all, and she's just it's kind of agonizing.
Mm.
And people use the word cringe probably way too much these days, but I don't cringe, but I just felt so bad for her in the moment because it's like, God, they're just putting her through the ringer, and Johan's worthless and useless as a just even if he hadn't actually apparently been like philandering, like just step in and just say something, like you don't have to, she's got her own agency, but she's clearly in the moment just kind of overwhelmed and shocked by all this, and like just do something, say something, hell, like just hey man, hey, whoa, this is inappropriate. Okay,
Yeah,
like I thought we were just here to like look at a painting. My wife is familiar with my past. That's my past, but it's cool. Like, but this is you're saying some shit that's like this is not on the level.
you know what? I had just lost all respect in Johan, where I didn't even think to consider that he would do something like that. But you're right. Like he needs to step up here, and he does not.
Yeah, just establish some kind of boundaries that are supposed to be present here for the people that are treating you and your partner like this.
Yeah. And eventually he does set a boundary, but it's too late, too little, too late at
Way
that
too late.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Later, they're walking home as this. Well, here's so I don't know if they were doing day for night shots, but they're walking home and you see the moon, but then and it like that beautiful shot that you were describing, but then later on it seems as if the sun's completely up and they're talking in the day.
Yeah, it's yes, it's hard to tell. Like you said, is it meant to be day for night, or is it another? We're supposed to not really understand. Is it? I mean, like it's. I think we're supposed to believe that it's nightfall, but like you said, it looks more like the sun.
Yeah, so I was thinking maybe they stayed there all night and partied throughout the night, or you know,
Yeah,
the
or that.
nightmare
Yeah, that could
lasted
be
all
it.
night.
Yeah, because there is a lot that goes on in
Yeah.
the castle there. I mean, you got a full dinner, puppet show,
Dinner and a
creepy.
show. What else could you ask
Yeah,
for?
what else could you ask for?
Then you got dragged, and so
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Then you got taken to somebody's bedroom and put in the most awkward situation possible.
yeah. Alma confesses that she's read his diary and her fears of losing him to the demons, as well as her. She's also afraid of losing her will to persevere if that were to happen. She says that this is where she says that they want to separate them. They want him for themselves. As long as she's around, it's more difficult for them to get him. She pledges to stay. But he says nothing, which angers her, and she walks away crying. He tries to comfort her, but she is not in the mood, so he walks off. And again, she has to chase him.
Hmm.
So it's like, you can't, like, she's been supporting you, being your rock this whole time, and you get rebuffed twice, and you're like, all right, fuck it, I'm gone. It's like, dude, you got to try a little. Try a
Yeah,
little
or
bit.
even just she's entitled to her emotions,
Right.
right? Like that's like always a thing. I feel like it's just in general when people speak of whatever kind of relationship dynamic. It's like if somebody's upset or mad, like they don't have to tell you. If you try to comfort them and they reject it, they're still entitled to their emotions. So you don't just walk off like, all right, well, fine, if you're going to be like that, like like that's your partner. Stick around, even if she's going to go through it and rebuff you a couple times. Go, okay, I'm here whenever you're ready to process it. But you're entitled to your emotions, especially after what just happened there. Like you're just walking around acting like everything's normal, Johan, and she's going through something here. Like you got to stick through that and kind of weather that a little bit because that's it's only natural for her to kind of be reacting like this, and especially with how cold you've been previously and all the other stuff that's going on. This is kind of what you've inherited by your own actions.
Also, let's not forget she is pregnant.
Yes,
And so
yes.
with that comes inherently some emotions and stuff like that. So he's oh Johan, oh Johan.
This is turning into us just dragging the hell out
Yeah,
of Johan,
exactly.
which he very deserved.
Yes. So then the scene ends and fades to black, and we get the final. Finally, we get the title card, "Hour of the Wolf." So this is. I don't remember. Do you remember if in the beginning, and I've seen it already twice, they didn't actually say the name of the movie, did they?
I think they did.
They did.
I
Okay.
think, and I need to rewatch it again to confirm now because now I'm second guessing or
I probably have
questioning
it in
it.
my notes already, and I probably said it. I'm just not remembering right now. But I just thought it was so cool. Like we don't see this. Like this only happens this one time where like they have like segments. I didn't realize it was going to be one segment, and then the other segment was going to be like the Hour of the Wolf. I just thought it was kind of cool.
I thought it was really cool. Like when it came to that, it's almost like marking a point of okay, like we're about to venture into like crazier, events here. You thought it was insane what we saw before. Just wait.
Yeah. So then it's night in the cabin, and a match is seen through the window. Johann is lighting matches and letting them burn down. And it's another great shot composition here. Johann says that night was there was a time night was for sleeping, but no more. He says now that they've made it through most of the night, this hour is the hardest hour, the hour of the wolf. It's the hour when most people die and most babies are born, and when nightmares come to us. Then he also recounts this really fucked up childhood trauma of being locked in a closet where, as his parents said, a small person uh, lives who gnaws off the toes of naughty children. He screamed in horror to be let out. When he was finally let out from the darkness into the light, as we mentioned earlier, his father asked him to beg for forgiveness, which he did. He was then told to go to the couch and prepare to be punished, which was him laying on the couch with his pants down and hit with a cane. His father asked him how many times should he be hit, and he said as many as were needed. Afterwards, he asked his mom for forgiveness as well. Sorry, what's that sentence I'm saying? Afterwards, he asked his mom for forgiveness as well, which she gave him, and he kissed her hand. And I feel like the way he said it was like, I can't believe that I kissed her hand when they like punished me that way. This whole incident here would fuck anybody up. You know,
Yeah, this scene was like already just like it builds off of this, but it's just him explaining so much of this stuff. Even so, like where it starts, what you mentioned, he says, gives us the title drop, Hour of the Wolf. Just I want to go back real quick. He says this is when, like you said, most people die,
mm-hmm.
most babies are born, and nightmares come to us. So either he's sandwiching the one good thing in between two bad things, right? Like like oh, it's when people die and babies are born, but also nightmares come to us. Or he thinks all three of those are bad. And
Oh,
I think it's a weird thing either way to say to your pregnant wife.
Oh shit! Right? Yeah.
It's just like, what? Like, yeah, the hour of the wolf. Like this is when best case scenario while you're having your baby, if this is where it happened, because this is when most babies are supposed to be born. Um, this is also when a bunch of other people are dying. So we're recycling the life death energy right now. But also this is when I just think it's fascinating to me for him to say like babies are born and then nightmares come to us back to back like that.
Yeah.
So then there's that. So it's like there's just a lot to unpack there about his psyche. And then, like you said, then his childhood trauma, where apparently they're punishing him for whatever he did. He never says what he did wrong.
Right.
They locked him in a closet that they had told him earlier. A monster is in this closet, a little person that will, like you said, eat a child's toes, basically, which is such a specific, weird, old school, kind of there's evil creatures out in the woods. There's evil creatures in the bogs or whatever. The kind of stories I grew up reading about, like the old, alleged true ghost stories and allegedly true hauntings. And it was like, oh, don't go out into the fields out here in this part of, wherever, because this is where the strange little demons or something will be there, and they attack children, and very much like the old school fairy tales.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, it's like really screwed up. Definitely would traumatize people. It makes me think of like stories I've read about things parents used to tell kids way back in the day about the monsters that would come for you if you screwed up. And it was like I'm in San Antonio. A lot of the Mexican population here, I've heard about the kukui
El Cucuy, yeah, yeah.
and stuff like that. And then it also made me think of like stories I'd heard of where they would some parents even more extreme would like use like real world examples of actual scary people. And I remember reading ages ago, like at some point, I guess during the Napoleonic Wars, England, common folk in England were like kind of so nervous about Napoleon eventually coming to conquer England because he'd been conquering all this other land, that he was like kind of the boogeyman there. And I'd read about like apparently like some mothers would tell that to their children, like, hey, if you misbehave, Napoleon's going to come and conquer England. It's going to be your fault. And I was like, that's so fucked up. Like to put all of that on your kid, it's like, now eat your goddamn broccoli. you know, each if you don't finish your damn plate, like Napoleon's gonna, it's like, oh shit, I guess I got to power through these Brussels sprouts, or everyone I know is gonna be destroyed by
Yeah,
Napoleon.
there's a certain part when you know you've reached adulthood when you realize that your parents were just people and making fucked up decisions just like you do, and that reminds me of that fact. You know, they're
Yeah,
not perfect. They make mistakes and like tell just like you're saying, traumatize their children.
yeah, totally. And it's interesting here because Johan then mentions like after his father takes him out the closet, then canes him, and then he asks his mother for forgiveness, and he says she's like crying when she says, yes, I forgive you. And you get this hint of like maybe she was kind of regretting, hey, did we take this too far? And maybe the dad was like, no, look, this is how my dad raised me. My dad was even hard, like the generational trauma thing, right? Like
Yeah,
Johan's dad might have been like, oh, this is what we do in the family. This is how you raise a son. You tell him that there's a monster in the closet. He misbehaves. You throw him in the closet for a little while till he begs to come out. Then you whoop him a little bit.
and
My,
then
my dad used to throw me down a cave and tell me that the cave creatures would eat me. So I'm actually going easy on the kid.
for half of a split second, I thought that you were making a confession about your childhood. I was like, wait, what? I was like, okay, thank God.
That would be amazing. If like I come on my horror confessional to throw my dad completely under the bus. And my dad used to throw me in a cave. Like, wait, what? How? Where were y'all living? Why were there caves? Did nobody else notice this? Like, I'm like, it
It was
was
different
tradition.
times. It was
It was different
Mississippi,
times. It was Mississippi. Nobody cared. Everybody's like, yeah, you got to throw the kids in the cave. There's a bunch of other kids in the cave too. Like, what'd you do? Yeah, I didn't do my homework.
We called
we're all
ourselves the
just,
Lost Boys. You know, it was fine.
yeah, we're all just trading stories about how we misbehaved to get thrown in the cave again. Yeah, I pulled my sister's hair. Damn it. I knew I
Got to
shouldn't have
take out
done
the
that.
trash again, so I'm living here for next week.
Oh, that's
Okay, so
amazing.
then later, Alma comments on how quiet it is, and so they sit there just quiet amongst themselves for a bit, and then Johan says that he has to tell her something, but that she cannot tell anybody this. She said, and she agrees to that. And he says that he never thought he'd recount this story, But then he tells of a confrontation with a small boy while out fishing on the island, which culminated with him killing the boy, hitting him repeatedly over the head with a rock, and dumping his body into the sea. So, I this scene. Hold on, let me finish this. Alma is shocked by Johan's confessions. And I was thinking, what the fuck was this scene? Why was this scene? Where did this boy come from? Did it actually happen? And then I was thinking, is this himself? Is it his inner child that he's killing? I don't know. What was going through your head in this scene?
I have I've even the rewatch. I was just like, because they keep going back to it too. Is the thing
Yeah.
they keep like the child. You see the child descend in the water and then kind of float back to the surface a little and then descend again, and then they replay that shot later. And like you said, I mean, there's so many different potential interpretations of it. Is it related to Veronica Vogler? The kid that they had, you know, um, it's so
Oh
bizarre.
fuck yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so bizarre. Like, is it a real? Like you said, is it real? Is it not? And he, the kid seems feral and strange and like not like a normal. The kid's watching him, and then like just does something to his boot that, and we don't see. He's talking, but the dialogue is deliberately muted. He yells at the kid about something. The kid bites him, um, and like he like accidentally seems to knock the kid out. Then the kid bites him again when he reaches for him again. And that's when he like, I literally exclaimed, "Oh shit!" when he picks up the rock and smashes,
Yeah.
the kid like repeatedly in the head. And it was like, oh, Johan is he was a dick before. Now we see like this guy's a monster.
And
Even
this
if
shit
this is all in his
escalated
head, this is
quickly.
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, it escalates out of seemingly nothing and so quickly, and it seems like he's just at first kind of annoyed with the kid, and the kid's like very strange watching him, and at a certain point gets so close and start just keeps watching that Johan's like, I'm just gonna pack up my fishing gear and try to leave. And like, yeah, and then like what does this even mean? I don't know, but like it was shocking when he picks up the rock and is like, okay, I'm just gonna bludgeon a boy to death.
And then just throw his body in
And
the
just throw his
water.
body, yeah, into the over the cliffside and into the water and
Yeah. For
head on home.
me, I don't think this happened. Because none of it has happened. But again, it's up to interpretation for your own
Mhm.
individual interpretation. But I just don't think it happened. But I think it's like, yeah, if everybody's representing like his demons that he has in his closet, I don't see why this kid wouldn't also be an extension of that, and like the death of innocence, sort of.
Yeah.
And so I just thought it was, yeah, just when I saw it the second time, I was like, fuck, now I know. Because at first, because they both have their shirts off, and like the kid is like laying on the rock and like in a weird pose sort of thing, and I'm like, is something gonna happen here? I really
Yeah.
don't want to happen.
Yeah. I was worried. I was like, this is gonna get like into a fucking weird, super uncomfortable place.
Yeah, especially since it's a European movie. I was like, oh, I don't know. But
Exactly. Yeah, you don't want to stereotype, but it's like I was like, fuck, like
yeah,
they might
look.
have different sensibilities, very different sensibilities than what I would have right now. But I didn't remember like hearing anything about like, oh yeah, Bergman, legendary director. He did have that one moment where he had a strange pedophilic scene in one of
Right.
his movies. So I was like, I feel like that would have been unearthed. So I was like, it's probably not going there, but where the hell is this going?
Yeah, very
Completely didn't
surprised.
expect where it was going. Yeah, and like you said, I mean, I think it is kind of like a weird confession in his mind, or something of his, some part of his psyche, and it's coming right on the heels of him talking about his own childhood. So like maybe like you said, death of innocence. He's killing his past self. Like you said, there's parallels. The kid's got his shirt off along with Johan. Who
Mm,
knows?
yeah.
But yeah, and like I mean, like this kid has never appeared before. Like we don't know what any of this really means, but like there's something significant about it because that imagery they keep going back to it in this last act of the movie.
Right. And again, like you said before, what like you just said, he didn't appear before. Nobody asks about him later. Also, the whose kid is he? Like we just don't know, and that this just leads me to believe that didn't really happen. But then we're back with Alma and Johan, and Alma just looks at him as the clock ticks over and over and over. Suddenly, there's a knock at the door, and Johan asks Alma if she's sure it's locked. And she says she's sure she checked it twice. But in walks Herbrand as if he owns the motherfucking place. He says, I'm like, who, what bills you pay to just be walking in my house like this? But
Again, like you said, they're all habitual line steppers. Perfect description. Like just I'm gonna just walk up in here and go ahead because he's not just walking in here. He's also like got another level of violation.
yeah, and then, but also this goes to your point about The Shining, you know, where that bartender just shows up randomly and like moves the story on by like putting him in bad situations, you know, or like egging him on, you know.
Yeah, definitely encouraging him to commit further evil.
Right. And so Hirbrand says that it looks like it's going to storm, so he decided to stop in for a while. He also says that he has an errand. He's here to invite them to another party or another dinner, another small dinner at the castle. Nothing big at all, but he adds that Veronica Vogler is among the invitees and that she's agreed to come and that so shall he. And then all of a sudden he says, then it's settled, slaps the table and goes to walk, goes to leave. But before he does, he places a pistol on the table for protection against small animals on the island and then leaves.
Yeah, just like the last person that needs to have a gun is uh is Johan at this point. And also, like he mentions, Veronica Vogel is going to be there. And the first time I watched it, somehow somebody had said something, and I couldn't pick up on it like the second time. I don't know how I interpreted it this way the first time, and it kind of comes into play later. But for some reason, I was under the impression that Veronica Vogler might be dead somehow,
Okay.
and like his hallucination of her from the or his diary entry about her earlier was like some kind of hallucination or something. So and then when I was like, well, nobody really says anything like to really clearly indicate that at all. I don't know why I had that impression, but for some reason I did. And so then he says she's going to be there, and I was like, well, mate, was I misinterpreting something? And then as you know, as we'll get to, like there's something about the movie maybe is supposed to suggest that because there is there's things that kind of hint toward that eventually, but it was just like I remember that standing out to me in that moment on top of everything else, just feeling like, well, I thought I don't know why, but I
I
thought
was
she
going to
was
say
dead.
you're right, and then later on in the movie, we do see her on a gurney.
Yeah, she's laid out with a sheet over her, and that's
Yeah,
when I was like, okay, well, so then was I right? But then things get stranger and weirder, and I think it's just supposed to be, it's just masterful stuff, and I think we're supposed to get impressions that make us question things,
right,
and I think that's it's definitely by
right.
design.
So then Alma asks him to lock up the weapon, but he refuses. He asks what they're going to do now, and she says he's going to tell her all about Veronica Vogler, and then she slams his diary on the table. This is her line. Now she wants to know everything because she just went to a fucking ghost party, and then the ghost just delivered a very real gun, right?
Yes, yes. Like, what the hell is even going on anymore?
So he says, what do you want me to tell you? That their tryst went on for 5 years, that they were caught, that it was a huge scandal, and then people lost interest, and then their relationship ended. But Alma says that's not what his diary says. She then flips to an entry that describes Johan's obsession with Veronica. As she was reading, Johan was turning the gun over and over in his hands. He even attempts to grab the diary away from Alma at one point, but she keeps reading. Basically, he says that they were, like the Bible says, they were one flesh. Then her husband came and took her away, and that they didn't see each other for several years. She admits to Johan that she thought she understood him, thought she understood what was going on, but she was wrong. She asks if he thinks she wants to stay on the island only to be murdered. Do you think she wants to see him running away after that woman, talking to ghosts while she defends herself constantly? But here she is. Then finally, Johan picks up the pistol and points it at her, and Alma is shocked. But Johan just looks at her. Finally, she breaks down and cries, knowing that she has lost him and herself in the process. He just continues to look at her until finally telling her to get up from the table and to leave the house. He says, it's not dark anymore. You'll find your way. Then he shoots 3 times, but we do not see if it hits her. So, how quickly this shit devolved, right? It
Yes,
felt
it
like 3 minutes from when the guy left the gun to when he fucking grabbed it and was shooting at her.
yeah, it just goes it devolves very quickly, like you said, and I was really like, and he's not really just about to like shoot her or something, right? And like I was thinking, like it's like a Chekhov's gun. I was like, it's a little late in the game for that, but like it's going to come into play later. Nope. Like we're it's like if you introduce a gun in Act One, like Bergman's like, if you introduce a gun in Act Three, it needs to go off within like 3 minutes. It's like, oh, I guess so. Okay, then we're not going to let this wait around for a
The
while at
thing
all.
is, I think this is where it kind of kicks up gear. It's been a slow burn up to here, right? But now, once Herdbrand shows up with that gun, it's like, oh fuck, balls to the wall from here on in.
Yes, completely. The horror gets ratcheted up from here like
Yeah, because
dramatically.
I was kind of scared because I looked this up. I saw the trailer. I looked at reviews of it. I didn't want to read too much about it because I hadn't seen it either. But everywhere I saw, like people listed it as horror. I was like, okay, okay. But I hadn't seen any horror till up to right now, so I was a little bit worried. But it is totally horror, and I love
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
I was feeling the same way. I was like, when is this like turn fully into a horror? I was like, it's kind of a surreal. I get it, it's nightmarish. I don't know if I fully because it's psychological horror, but then I was like, oh no, like it the last 15-20 minutes. It's like, oh, this they really went full on horror with this in a really
Yeah.
fascinating way.
So next we see that Johan is at the castle, frantically looking for Veronica. There he runs into the Countess, who is bringing dinner back to her room. He asks her about the dinner party, but she says there isn't one. So he goes to leave, but she asks him to help remove her stockings. And if he does, she'll tell him where Veronica is. So, of course, he does so, and even kisses her feet when she tells him to do so. But she does keep her part of the bargain and tells him where Veronica is.
And we get a full on foot fetish scene.
Yeah. Yeah. Fucking Quentin Tarantino was
I
like
was
eating
I,
his heart out.
I was gonna say I was just thinking like Tarantino like this. He might not have ever seen the movie, but I feel like he had to have at least watch this scene. She's like describing her feet and the arches and heel and everything. I was like, oh my god, like this is a interesting sidebar
Yeah.
here.
And she's an older lady, and she even says, like, you hate the thought of touching me or something like that. So she, like, forces this on him.
Yeah, yeah, and in negotiation for where is Veronica, and it gets increased. I mean, it's already a bizarre movie, but this gets like very Kafka esque at this point, where people are saying like one thing and like contradicting each other, and things are like kind of the little bit of sense that the story makes in a good way. This is starting to break down here, and this is definitely showing the fragmentation of
I
Johan's
like
psyche.
the word choice there, fragmentation, because that comes back later on in
Yes,
the movie. So very apt word choice there. But again, he's lost in the castle, but he walks into a bird, and then suddenly the Baron is around the corner. Well, see, I was getting a bit confused here because was it the Baron he was talking to, or was it,
I was gonna say the Mister, the one name guy, or
yeah, Lindhurst?
the share of the castle.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it was the Baron.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because
I need to revisit, but yeah,
later on we find out that the Lindhurst is the Birdman,
yeah.
but the Baron kept showing up when birds were around as well. So that's what was throwing me off a bit. But yeah, I think you're right here. It is the Baron, and the Baron confesses that Veronica has been his lover for years, and that she has told him everything about their relationship, Veronica and Johann's, and that he will be suffering tonight. He will be by his bed as Johann makes love to Veronica.
I mean, we've got foot fetish and cuckold. Like,
Cuckold, and when you like to be seen doing it, was it
oh yeah, like a
exhibition?
yeah exhibitionist, and yeah, like we this part of the film brought to us by Pornhub. Just
Very
out of
kinky,
nowhere.
very kinky. I'm not familiar with that website.
I've heard things.
Okay, all right. I'll have to look it up later, based off your recommendation.
Yes. Recommended by Johnny. That's the one takeaway
Yeah.
from this entire podcast episode.
So then he offers to take Johan to her. After leading him to a doorway, the Baron walks away crying, hunched over with his face in his hands. And in a series of great shots, he continues to walk towards the wall, and then they cut away to Johan. And then surprisingly, he's able to walk vertically onto the wall like the Spider-Man that he talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very simple yet very cool effect. He even walks on the ceiling, apparently upside down. It's very creepy, especially when he starts stomping around. And then the Baron looks at him and tells him it's just his grief or his jealousy and to please leave. What did you think of this scene right here? Or this
I
effect?
loved it.
Yeah.
This was like, again, when you really feel like, oh, they're like really diving into like the surreal horror imagery. I don't know. There's something hard to describe about it because the effect is so unique in that it doesn't it looks like it doesn't look like the cheap way that you normally would do it. It doesn't look like they just flipped the film upside down or something, right? But at the same time, it doesn't look like he was actually hanging from the ceiling either.
Yeah.
It's a weird gravity defying. There's a physicality to it that makes it feel like it feels unnatural. It doesn't look like like they just did like some kind of camera trick. It just looks like this guy is just unnaturally there, and it looks like gravity kind of wants to pull on him, but just he's like, nah, fuck off, gravity. I'm
I was
doing
gonna
my
say
own
this
thing.
is a shot very similar to a shot in Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yes, yes. We're like, they're Teen, I
Johnny
think,
Depp.
oh yeah, and Johnny Depp as well. Yeah, like just Freddy's dragging people across the ceiling and shit like that, and like it's. I really really liked the visual here. It was really creepy.
And do you know how they make that effect? How they do that effect?
So I've seen like older like movies. I know like Buster Keaton did something like this once upon a time, ages and ages ago, in like the rotating room.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So they keep the camera steady, and then the room is built out on a kind of so it can rotate. And so
yeah,
yeah, it looks like you're walking on the ceiling, but you're just walking on the floor. But because it's a really neat shot.
yeah.
Wasn't expecting it here, but used very well.
Used really well, and like I said, it even like because I've seen it done in other stuff, and it's like, oh, I get that that's how they do it, but it was like something about the way he filmed. I think maybe the movement. Normally, you see, I think in those
Yes.
scenes, typically it's like more of a lateral movement, and instead he's it's side to side across the screen to show, oh, like it's this person's walking upside down, right? And he's walking away from the camera, up the wall on the far wall, then comes back toward the camera. And I think something about that, you hardly ever see that kind of movement when somebody does one of these shots.
Along with him being hunched over and crying, you're like, oh Jesus, I don't like this at all.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's
Not
so
There's something
ugh.
about not being able to see somebody's face because we as humans look to somebody's face to tell whether or not we're in danger. Typically, if we see a smile, we know that we're safe. If you see a frown or somebody's angry, you know you're in danger. You can't see that with him. He's got his hands in his face,
Yeah,
his face in his hands.
it feels like a nightmare. It feels like actual something that would a lot of movies
Yes,
try to capture the idea of a nightmare. This feels like something you would legit see in a nightmare, where it's off putting.
something out of like a early '90s Nine Inch Nails video or something.
Yes, yes,
So
100%.
then Johan backs away slowly, unsure of what he just saw. He enters a room with Corrine, and we hear piano music being played. She hushes him and tells him that conductor Kreisler is playing. I was like, oh, we're introducing new characters in the final act? Okay, go ahead,
Yeah,
go off. And
yeah, go,
then
yeah, do your thing.
we see the old woman in the hat as well. Corrine whispers in his ear that Veronica has waited long enough, doesn't he think? She's even more beautiful. And he says that her husband is hurting, meaning the Baron is hurting. She also mentions Alma, saying 3 shots, one of which was fatal. So at this point, we don't know what happened to Alma, but right now we think, based on what she just said, that she's died.
Right. But at the same time, it's like, well, didn't we see her at the very beginning talking
Exactly.
about all these events in the past? It was like, what even
So then
happened here?
the old woman says that she must remove her hat to hear the music better. I was like, I don't think it works like that, but okay. You know? So then, as she removes her hat, we see her head is bald and looks plastic almost. Then she removes her face, which appears to be made of rubber, and it's a fucking amazing effect. And Kareen comments on how much it smells of glue covering her nose as she does. What did you think
Yes,
here?
this is so good. And until I rewatched it the second time, I had forgot that this is one of the things he drew is the lady who's threatening to remove her hat,
Yes.
but if she does, her face comes off with it. I'd forgot that that was one of the images. When he was talking about the images, for whatever reason, I fixated on the Birdman one. I think he said that was the most evil, and I'd forgot about that. And then I watched it the second time. I was like, oh my god, like no, this is why he's like, because when she says I'm going to remove my hat, he looks at her like, oh no. And I was like, why is he like, like other than the fact that this is all very bizarre and surreal, like I wonder why he's reacting like that. And then watching it the second time, I was like, oh, this is exactly the thing he was dreading in his drawing.
Yes. His nightmare come true.
Yes,
And the effect itself looks amazing. Like
looks terrific.
1968, like
Yeah,
absolutely incredible. Creepy as
looks
fuck.
terrific.
Yeah.
And there's just, I mean, there's something about like just doing things practical effects. There's a tactile sensation with it, where even if it doesn't look always like 100% quote unquote realistic or what have you, it just the physicality of it, because you see her reach up and start pulling her face off, and like you get that glimpse of it, and it looks really good. And it just kind of is ageless and timeless, like it being able to see it like that, the effect is never going to wear
Yeah,
off.
that's an image that is burned in my mind from now on. It
Yeah, that's one of
reminds
the best
me,
images from the film.
yeah, and it reminds me of Wax Museum with Vincent Price. There's something similar that happens. Is it Wax Museum or is it?
Is it Dr.
Yeah,
Fibes,
no,
the abominable Dr.
I
Fibes, where
haven't
his
seen that one yet. That's I haven't.
oh man, you got to watch Dr.
Yeah,
Fibes. I
I
can't
gotta
remember
go.
which one but I think you're right. I think it is the Wax Museum. I think I'm getting them confused, because it's the one where Vincent Price, he has like a
House of
wax
Wax. Duh,
House
that's
of
what.
Wax.
Yeah, yeah. It
Yes,
reminds
where
me of House of Wax with Vincent Price, right?
yeah, he has kind of the false face
Yes.
going there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
So
man, oh yeah, you got to watch Dr.
I
Fibes, dude.
know, I
What?
know. It's been on my list. I was supposed to watch it with Max
Oh, that'll be a fun
early
time.
in the year, and just things got out of he got busy,
Yeah.
I got busy, so I definitely need to watch it for sure. Johan backs away in horror as the old woman has now removed her eyes as well and placed them each into a glass of wine, where they make a metallic ting sound, which I thought was kind of funny, but
Yeah,
still really cool. Like her eye sockets being completely blank, like black, because she's removed the eyes. Just looks fantastic.
it looks amazing, and yeah, we are full-fledged horror centric right now.
Yes, yes.
You
It's
can't get more horror than the old lady pulled her face off and pulled her eyes out.
it's starting to feel now a bit like a Salvador Dali painting. It's starting to
Yes,
feel very weird. We're like in the midst of nightmares. It feels otherworldly what we're in right now, and I'm loving it.
completely, 100% agree.
Yeah. So back in the hallway, we hear a crow cackle, and then Lyndhurst appears and he comes into frame. He says Johann is not looking presentable for Veronica, and he applies lipstick to Johann's pale face. He puts eyeliner on and foundation, not a full beat, just a half beat. And then he also dresses him in a silk robe and offers some cologne, which I thought he was like, maybe you just want to smell yourself, but here's a spritz just in case.
Yeah, he does say something like that. Like I know you'd rather smell yourself or like your own smell. I was like, oh, that's an interesting observation.
We all like our own brand, man. Like, so you're yourself. He says you're yourself, and yet not yourself. The ideal requirements for a tryst. He then leads Johann to her while walking down a hallway filled with dirty ass pigeons,
And a
rats
ton
with
of them.
wings.
A ton of them too. Like
Yeah,
and like they're there. This is not any kind of special effect or anything. They're just walking down this hallway with pigeons. Max von Sydow is flinching. Um, and yeah, it's whoever the actor was. I forget who it is, but who plays Lindhorst. He's just patrolling down unaffected. It's really well done. Actually, it looks very eerie and gothic.
right. So then before he leaves, Lyndhurst says, You see what you want to see with his hands up, and we see wings at his sides. So, like you said, he is the Birdman. Johan finds Veronica, who appears to be dead. She's lying in that gurney, covered with a sheet. He removes the sheet and he starts caressing her naked body and like going from the top of her body down and touching all the places. And then she suddenly sits up and laughs and starts kissing him. I'm sorry, he kisses her back and then he removes his shirt and they just go to town, basically just making out, right? Suddenly, he hears others laughing and he looks up, even though Veronica pleads for him not to, and sees all the guests from the dinner party laughing at him cruelly, mockingly. And this is where I think was this the upside down painting? Is he that artist that the Baron was
Oh,
talking about earlier in the movie? It's because they
nice,
were
nice
laughing at
connection
him.
there.
Yeah, he
I
is
love
now
that.
that artist who they were mocking.
Completely. And I loved. This is like when I saw this on the trailer. This is like one of the reasons why I put this movie down. I was like, ooh, because I love the shot, the way it's composed, and the way it's set up of all of them looking at him.
Yes.
It's just eerie enough, and it reminds I mean, it doesn't really look quite the same, but the vibe is very similar. There's this old movie, 1945, Dead of Night. That's an anthology movie, mostly horror with like one comedy segment in between, and it has like a nightmare segment for its closing segment. And there's a shot of a bunch of people staring at a guy through a jail cell, and it reminded me a lot of that. And that's like one of my favorite images in horror ever because they're all looking at him and they're crowded into this very tight space to look through the bars of the cell. And like it feels like there's like 10 people somehow packed into this, and they're all like smiling and laughing at him, and he's like cowering in the corner from that, and something else is happening in the cell. And just like this idea of like I'm being watched by all these giggling crazy people in this one, like this one shot. It reminded me so much of that, and I was just like, oh, that is eerie. That is just so creepy to me. That just got under my skin so much.
And there's something about it being in black and white as well that
Yes,
makes you
yes,
feel unease.
yes. That magnifies it. So I don't. You're completely right. I don't think it would have the same impact if it was in color.
Yeah.
I feel like the black and white really magnifies it.
And so Johan's face looks absolutely amazing here. His makeup has been smeared. The guests, like you said, are all in various poses. The most striking being Corrine, who has her back up against the wall, um, in her nightgown, and has her hand on her groin as if she were
Yes,
masturbating. She's not actually masturbating because this movie is from 1968, but like she's ready, she's prepared. Like at the drop
yeah,
of a dime, she could start if she wanted to.
yes.
And then there's Ernst laying on the floor, and then there's Kreisler in the window, and he's like bent over with his hands at his side. Like it looks so weird.
If I could get a poster from this movie, that would be the poster. I would put that on my wall in my office.
Yes,
It's
agreed.
such a great shot.
So then Johann has had enough. He's been broken. He falls to his knees as Veronica stands caressing herself behind him. He thanks them for finally crossing the line. These habitual line steppers have finally crossed the last line.
I was gonna say, yeah, like they've been crossing the line, Johan. Like I don't know if you noticed, but
But the mirror, he says the mirror has been shattered. But what do the shards reflect? Like you said earlier.
mhm.
So he continues to talk, but the score is overlaid on his dialogue and we don't hear what happens. And the scene fades to the image of the little boy he killed underwater. Then we see Alma, and we're back in present day. She's saying that Johann did fire 3 shots. Only one hit her and did some small damage and only left a small scar. She fell over and played dead while he ran around the house and eventually left. She heard him run towards the castle and she hid the gun and hid herself as well. When he came back, she said he looked insane, talking to himself. She says he grabbed his stuff and walked towards the woods, and she followed him. In a marshy area, she found him, hunched over. She asks him if he sees her, and he looks at her and once again caresses her face, and then they embrace. She takes him into her arms and comforts him as you would a small child. As we hear the babbling brook in the background, it's very serene, and she falls asleep. When she wakes up, she's frightened to see the Baron where Johann once was. She jumps up startled and she asks, "Where is he?" And he says, "I know where you can find him." And he leads her off into the woods, and she sees him off in a distance, and she calls to him, but suddenly Hairbrand appears behind him and gets his comeuppance. He slaps him repeatedly, like just fucking disrespectfully.
Yes, totally goes in like he's like, oh yeah, I've been waiting for this. Man, I've been thinking about this all day.
I've been waiting on this beatdown.
Yeah,
And then the Countess suddenly shows up and she slashes his neck, blood pouring out. Lyndhurst gets in on the beating as well when he lunges at him, and we get shots of a crow back and forth, and suddenly the Birdman, Lyndhurst, strikes at Johann with his nose, drawing blood. I feel like in the hands of a less accomplished or less skilled director, this could have been really cheesy. Like the part
yeah.
where like the bird, where a man uh, pecks at you with his nose and draws blood, But this was handled very well.
It's handled splendidly to the point. Like I remember, I was the first time I watched it, I rewound that a few different times because I was like, you're not really like you said. You kind of just it's that callback to I can't tell where his beak. Is the beak a mask or not when he
Right.
talks about the drawing. But like at first, I was like, did he stab him with something or like I'm not sure exactly what. And it happens so fast and it's cut and edited so perfectly. And so yeah, it's like that would be goofy with like 99% of probably any other director, and that's not a disparage to disparage any other director. That's just how good Bergman is in this moment to make this to pull this off to the point that it looks menacing and legitimately dangerous. And like I was like, what even happened? And but you can it's convincing. The injury looks convincing on Johan.
Right. Then Johann, beaten and bloody, stands up as the demons all look at him. I'm calling them demons now because that's what I feel like they're his inner demons. They all stand up and look on at him. But suddenly they all disappear, including Johann, leaving only Alma alone in the forest, once again peaceful and serene. She finds his satchel and the scene fades. Back in the present, a close up shot of Alma, almost a floating head. She says, "There's one thing that she's been wondering." And once again, she asks about whether or not people start thinking and acting like someone that they've been with for a very long time. She asks if that's why she began seeing those spirits, or were they there regardless? Would they have been there regardless? Had she loved him less and not cared so much about the things surrounding him, would she have been able to protect him better? Or did she not love him enough and that's why he was so jealous? Was it the man eaters? Was it because of them or his wandering eye that it went so bad for them? She says she thought they were so close to each other. If only she could have followed him always. But there were way too many unknowns, too many unanswered questions. And then the scene fades to black as Alma looks at the camera one last time. We hear the tick, tick, tick of a clock fading until there's just silence and a black screen. The end.
The end.
The end.
So good, man. I really enjoyed that. I felt so bad at the end. Alma's over here blaming herself still, and I want to be like, girl, you're better off. Don't
Yes,
don't worry about did you love him enough or too much. You know what? You loved him well, and he was just a dick.
he was a dick who had his own inner demons and he wasn't able to beat them.
Yeah,
Which is terrible. But like,
yeah. I mean, some of it's the inner demons. You feel bad about that part to an extent, but some of that's like as we established, a lot of that's not.
right, right.
You can't blame the inner demons for like a lot of what he did. His just general behavior. Some of it, he's just a prick.
And speaking of Johann, Bergman did say he goes on to explain the main character Johann Berg regards his own position as an artist as an affliction. He says he can't escape it. There's no question that is of a gift from on high, no otherworldly relationship. It's just there, a disease, a perversion, a five-legged calf. He takes a very brutal view of his situation, and so maybe he's just like just doesn't think that he can go any further. I don't know. I don't know what Bergman was trying to say there.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned earlier, it's to a certain degree a little bit of a personal story.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so there's elements of that, but like Bergman still had so much more left in the tank too.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's weird to think of it as like him. I mean, it seems to be him kind of confronting this idea of a little bit of a tortured artist scenario, but it's not like this was like him at the end of his wits, and he was like, oh, he only made like one other film after this, and like had a breakdown or something, like the way basically you would see with Johan. It feels more, it feels personal, but also kind of like, I think with horror, I know when I write some stuff in horror, it's kind of like, well, what if you're kind of examining the worst case scenario of it. So it's like it's not necessarily personal in terms of this is how I actually feel, but it's kind of like, what if this little bit of a thing I feel was taken to like an extraordinary extreme in the worst direction,
Right.
or you take something that's like more wholesome and more positive and um, corrupt it. And that's a lot of what horror examines, is like, okay, what if we took something that was like, a more a positive situation, a gift, being an artist, and what if we twist that into what happens if you can't kind of cope with the idea of wanting to maintain your success as an artist or a creative sort, and et cetera, and what would be the worst case scenario of this? And I think that maybe that was more of Bergman's kind of um, examination of this. Like how far would it go if this went really far
And
south?
some of the other interpretations I saw was that Johann has been interpreted, like we were talking about earlier, as or you were just talking right now, Bergman's alter ego. Some interpret the film as the story of an artist's disintegration, also arguing that it reflects Bergman's own unraveling. But like you said, I don't really believe that at all. Others read it as a story of the self-destructive artist unable to maintain a relationship with reality, and I think that, kind of with like Bergman's alter ego, kind of sums it up for us. But so that's the movie. That was Hour of the Wolf. So what did you think on a whole of the movie?
It was really good. I mean, really good is kind of an understatement, actually. it was. It made me need to feel like I need to rewatch this immediately after it was done. And so that's basically when I did. I was like, okay, I got to run this right back because I've got to piece certain things together again, and the fact that it's so brisk helps. You kind of get this idea in your head for whatever reason of like art house movies or certain other things like being, oh, these are like 2.5 hours long, and and
Right.
this is
Yeah.
this is less than 90 minutes. I mean, it's the pacing on it is actually pretty brisk, but like, and for a movie that has like a lot of talking in it, for certain segments of it, it somehow maintains like a kinetic energy. Um, it's just a really fascinating watch. I really liked
Yeah.
it.
Same. I again, I'll mention how rewarding a second walkthrough is, because if I had talked to you after only watching the movie once, I was on the verge of disliking this movie just because I didn't understand a lot of it. But taking notes for the movie really helps me when discussing it, to see, to pick up on a lot of things that you don't pick up on a casual watch through, right? And so yeah, I after watching it the second time and discussing with you, I really love this movie. um
Yeah, it was. Yeah, like you said, I was kind of in the middle of it. It was like I was like, okay, this is pretty solid. Like I could see how some people that are really more so maybe into the art house features or more enamored with it than maybe I am right now. There's some cool stuff happening, but I just kind of felt like it was just gonna. I didn't anticipate it going in the direction. I don't think anybody could really anticipate it going in the direction it did,
right.
in really sticking the landing as well. It's one of those things where you kind of feel like you're watching a magic trick or something, that like, okay, well, this is leading to nothing. This is almost a Shaggy Dog story, and then all of a sudden it's like it, they did something spectacular that you weren't even anticipating. You didn't even realize this is what the trick was going to be. And yeah, I was in a very similar position as you, where I was kind of like, oh, this is good. This isn't necessarily something amazing. And then when it really connects, everything starts to gel. And like I said, I immediately felt like, okay, I got to run this back and make sure I didn't miss anything. And
Mhm.
running it back, I still missed stuff. And those stuff you pointed out, that was like, oh man, like I didn't even connect the dots on that, and it makes me feel like, yeah, it's worth another watch. And especially like I said, it moves so briskly. Actually, when you know the second time through, I was like, oh man, this is actually like got a pretty good moving at a pretty good clip, and it's kind of like you can rewatch this pretty easily and not feel like, oh, I got to eat up another huge chunk of my day doing
Yeah, I
so.
mean, I feel like the cinematography, the directing, the acting, the location, just impeccable, just great stuff all around. So I guess that can lead us to rating the movie. And
Hmm.
what we do here is we rate a movie out of five upside down crosses.
Oh yes.
So what would you give Hour of the Wolf?
So I feel like five. You know, again, just thinking of Celso's interview or episode with you last time, he said he reserves the he's a harsher critic, reserves the fives for exclusive stuff. I try not to. I'm not quite that
Right,
that level, but I do think grading on the curve of Bergman, five is like the seventh seal, right? Like
right.
so you kind of can't if you say it's a five, you're basically saying it's as good as that. And I haven't watched or seen all of his movies, but I know that that's the high mark, and I'd have I hold that movie in a very high regard. So I'm not going to say this is on that level. It's not necessarily trying to be. It's a very different story. All that to say, I'd give it firmly a 4.5. And like my first viewing of it, I was saying, oh, I think because I knew this part of the podcast coming up, I was like, I think I'd give it a 4 out of 5. And then I
Right.
watched it the second time, I was like, oh, this stuff connects. This is actually really well put together in a different way than I underestimated it the first time, and I still liked it. So now I'm bumping that to a 4.5 upside down
Nice.
crosses.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Well, I don't know if I'm at 4.5. So I would say like first walkthrough, I was barely at three. First watch through, I was barely at three. But watching it again for the show, taking notes, catching or taking notes, catching all the little things that I didn't catch the first time. I'm between a four and a five. Oh, I'm sorry,
Mm.
between four and four and a half. I would say, just having this conversation with you, talking it through, I had so much fun. I got to go four and a half upside down crosses on this. It was just so much fun. It's my first Bergman. I'm really looking forward to seeing others. I wanted to see Seventh Seal, and I had the silliest reason for wanting to watch Seventh Seal. Have you ever seen Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure?
Of course,
Or is it? Or
of
I
course.
don't remember. It's that one or
It's a
Bogus
bogus
Journey.
journey. I think is the
Bogus
second one,
Journey,
right?
yeah, yeah. Where
Yeah,
he's in, where Death is in there, and they're having the chess match, and that's like Seven Steel style. That's the only reason I know about it, and I'm like, I've been wanting to see it ever since. Like 30 years later, I still haven't seen it, so I need to watch it, and so I'm going to be watching it very soon. But I'm really excited to watch more Bergmans because, like, masterclass in directing and writing and cinematography, just everything. Just it's a great movie.
yeah, completely agree. And yeah, I was really impressed with Hour of the Wolf, and it by the end it definitely earns its horror bona fides as well. Like we've talked about, if anybody else watching it, be patient. You don't have to be that patient. It's about the 88-minute movie, 88-minute long movie. So you're not gonna have to be extraordinarily patient. But by the time it gets to really the after the dinner party, you can see things escalating, and the dinner party is already like weird and bizarre enough, and the puppet thing happens, and you're kind of like, okay, this is going somewhere. And then I mean, you're really rolling downhill by the last 10 minutes of
So
the
I
movie.
completely agree with you about giving it some time because it is, it's a bit of a slow start, but like I said, it's only 90 minutes, so it'll get you going there. So just be patient with it if you haven't seen it yet. All right, Johnny. So to be fully absolved of your horror movie sin, I will now be suggesting to you three movies that you need to watch. If you don't watch it, then you might burn in the fiery pits of hell. That's not on me, that's on you. And so the three movies that I'm going to suggest to you, the first one being a black and white silent film, 1922, The Phantom Carriage. And the next one being Haxon, which is another black and white silent film. And then the third being Possession, Andrei Zulowski, which was my second, or I think it was my third episode I did.
Oh wow.
And it is a life changing movie. Your life it'll be before Possession and after Possession. So I think all these movies, it's so hard to find movies that are like Hour of the Wolf because Bergman is so himself. But these catch bits and pieces of what he was going for and what his influences have been later on. So, yeah, I think those three movies, if you can, maybe you watch them and maybe later on you'll come back on the show and we can talk about them or some other movie. I'd love to have you back on.
I would love to be back on. This was so much fun. I don't get a chance to like just sit around and talk for freaking hours about a movie.
Yeah, yeah,
That's all I kind of want to do with my life. So this was fantastic. I'd love to be back on.
exactly. Well, that's why I love the show. I love doing it with people who are cool like you, who are fans and who are so talented, and we can help support them in all that sort of way. So, if you could once again let everybody know how they could follow you, how they could support you, all that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah, sure. Again, follow me Twitter, Instagram, TikTok at Compton Writes. And my book, my debut novel, The Spite House, comes out in February. Definitely pre-order now. Pre-order at your favorite local bookstore. If you don't have a favorite local bookstore, find yourself a favorite local bookstore. That's a really important thing to have. And also the Death in the Mouth anthology, which I'll have a story in along with several other super talented authors and the editors as well worked so hard to put that together, and that comes out October 1st. So I want to make sure I shout out Death in
Awesome.
the
And
Mouth.
pre-order. Don't forget to pre-order that book.
Yes, yes. Please, please. The Spite House. Feel free, by all means, pre-order. It comes out in February. You have plenty of time to scrounge up some
I've
money.
ordered it from my local bookstore, black-owned bookstore, Black Pearl Books in Austin. So I'm sure anybody else can do that as well if you're local in Austin. Otherwise, find it elsewhere. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
There'll be links, like I said. If you'd like to follow me, you can follow me on Twitter at MHCPod. You can follow me on Instagram at MyHorrorConfessional. If you'd like to email the show, you can email me at myhorrorconfessional@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, we do have a Patreon, patreon.com/myhorrorconfessional. We have been doing for 6 months. We've been taking all of our pledges and donating them to charities that help women get life-saving health care, such as abortion. Abortion is healthcare and it's a right. And so we've been donating the last 4 months. We've donated. We have 2 more months that we're going to be donating to. So if that's something that you want to support, once again, patreon.com/myhorrorconfessional. The artwork was done by my friend Cap Mikey. You can follow him on Instagram at Captain_Mikey_art. And the music was done by Taylor Fox, not Taylor Swift, as I said in the last episode. You can follow her on Instagram at the Taylor Fox. Once again, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you later.